The chandelier light shimmered like 1,000 unblinking eyes inside the plaza. Hotel ballroom. Journalists, eager investors, and high-profile influencers crowded beneath the ornate gold dome, raising crystal champagne glasses to the sweeping, elegant sound of a live string orchestra. Everyone had come to celebrate Reed Technologies' highly anticipated new corporate partnership with Cartier. But absolutely no one in that glittering room expected that the most expensive thing unveiled that night wouldn't be a flawless diamond necklace. It would be an act of public betrayal. Lauren Hayes stood quietly near a towering marble pillar, one hand resting gently, protectively on her swelling belly. 6 months pregnant, she had put on her absolute best navy silk gown, the exact same one her husband, Carter, had once said made her look like the ideal woman of a Fortune 500 CEO. She genuinely believed tonight was his moment, their moment, the culmination of years of shared sacrifice and late-night strategizing. But as the blinding white spotlight moved to the center of the grand stage, Carter Reed, her husband and the young golden star of Wall Street, confidently walked into the light holding another woman's hand. The entire room gasped in heavy, overlapping waves. Paparazzi cameras clicked relentlessly, sounding like rapid gunfire echoing off the marble walls. Carter smiled a wide, brilliant, practiced smile. Introducing Sloane Vega, the beautiful new face of the Reed Technologies campaign. She represents the fresh, bold vision of our company, he said, his voice as smooth and polished as a heavily rehearsed script. The captivated audience applauded enthusiastically, entirely not realizing that Lauren was standing right there, feeling completely invisible and suffocating. Under the glittering lights, Naomi Brooks, Lauren's fiercely loyal closest friend and a powerhouse attorney, gripped her wrist tightly. "Don't react," Naomi whispered urgently into her ear. "They want this to look clean. Don't give them a scene." But Lauren's iPhone was already buzzing nonstop in her clutch. Notifications from relentless gossip pages were exploding across her screen. Carter Reed debuts model girlfriend at Cartier Gala. She turned away from the crowd toward the mirrored wall and caught her own devastated reflection. Her mascara was slightly smudged, her breathing dangerously shallow. Behind her, people began to murmur, the whispers sharp and cutting. Wasn't his wife pregnant? Wow. He moved on fast. A PR stunt. Maybe. Every single whispered word pierced her chest like jagged glass. A few feet away, a tall, broad-shouldered man in an impeccable black tuxedo watched the entire unfolding scene quietly from the shadows. He possessed the kind of commanding presence that simply didn't need an introduction. Gabriel Sterling, a legendary billionaire investor and Carter's main corporate competitor, noticed the painful tableau. His jaw tightened in disgust. He had seen Carter manipulate media stories before, but this was something entirely different. This was pure cruelty being sold as brilliant branding. When the thunderous applause finally ended, Lauren tried desperately to slip out of the ballroom unnoticed, but a ruthless photographer caught her face mid-tear. The next morning, that heartbreaking picture would circulate the globe with the brutal caption, "Pregnant wife left alone at her husband's gala." Carter didn't even bother to look her way. He lifted Sloane's hand high into the air, smiling brightly for the flashing cameras, his heavy gold Rolex flashing brilliantly under the crystal light. Lauren's chest constricted so tightly she could barely draw breath. It was the exact same watch she had saved up for and given him on their first anniversary, now proudly displayed as part of his new fake power couple image. She moved quickly toward the exit, her heels echoing hollowly on the marble floors. Right behind her, she overheard a PR assistant whispering to another, "He specifically told us not to seat his wife. He said it would confuse the message." The phrase "confuse the message" repeated endlessly in her mind until it didn't even sound human anymore. It was just a cold, corporate calculation. Outside, the freezing, biting Manhattan air hit her flushed face. Snow began to fall softly from the dark sky, melting instantly on her bare shoulders. She clutched her small evening bag tighter, as if the mere pressure could somehow hold her shattered world together. The vibrant city lights blurred violently through her hot tears. For the very first time in years, she realized with a sickening drop in her stomach that she had nowhere to go. She couldn't return to the sprawling penthouse Carter now clearly shared with Sloane, and she certainly couldn't go back to the quiet home in Connecticut she'd willingly left behind, solely to support his skyrocketing career. Across the busy street, through the tinted glass of a waiting limousine, Gabriel Sterling watched her step hesitantly onto the icy sidewalk. He leaned forward and told his driver to wait. Something in the exact way she stood, incredibly dignified, even while entirely shattered, caught his attention and held it. Inside the warm, opulent ballroom, Carter raised yet another glass in a triumphant toast, laughing charmingly beside Sloane, completely oblivious to the fact that the tragic photo of his pregnant wife standing utterly alone outside the plaza would be the #1 trending topic by morning. Lauren turned her back on the glowing hotel lights, looking out into the cold city, and whispered fiercely to herself, "This isn't the end." And somewhere in the dark, idling limousine across the street, a deep voice murmured quietly to the empty cabin, "No, Mrs. Reed. This is exactly where your story truly begins." Morning light spilled harshly across the expensive hardwood floor of the Park Avenue penthouse, feeling exactly like a cruel lie. Lauren sat numbly on the edge of the gray velvet couch. Her large suitcase lay open on the floor, half-packed with tiny, folded baby clothes and a stack of precious ultrasound pictures. Carter's ruthless lawyer had emailed her right at dawn. It was one short, sterile message containing 3 incredibly cold words: "Read the prenup." She opened her MacBook Air, her pale fingers trembling over the trackpad. The PDF document glowed ominously on the screen. It was 22 dense pages of legal jargon she had blindly signed 2 years ago without even reading. Carter had kissed her cheek that day and said, "It's just a silly formality. Babe, my board and investors require it to protect the assets." Back then, she had trusted him implicitly. He was charming, ambitious, the sweet man who brought her Starbucks every single morning and promised her, "We'll build an empire together." Now, she saw the absolute, horrifying truth written clearly in the cold legal English. If she left him, or if he filed for divorce first, she would legally walk away with absolutely nothing. No corporate shares, no shared property, no spousal support. Even her name on the penthouse lease was classified under a clause of temporary occupancy. It wasn't a marriage contract at all. It was a ticking eviction notice just waiting to happen. Her phone rang loudly, startling her. Naomi's voice on the other end was sharp, fierce, and deeply protective. "Don't panic, Lauren. I'm reading the document right now. 2. There's a glaring loophole. Section 14. If you ever use company funds for personal affairs, the entire contract is rendered void." Lauren blinked, trying to clear the fog from her mind. Company funds? Naomi's tone dropped into a conspiratorial whisper. If he paid for that model's trip, her clothes, her time, if any of that touched the corporate accounts, that is your lifeline. Just then, the heavy front door lock beeped. Carter stepped confidently into the foyer, wearing his perfectly tailored black suit and an expression of complete indifference that simply didn't belong to the man she had once loved so deeply. He didn't even glance down at her pregnant belly. "I've arranged for professional movers to come by noon," he said casually, aggressively typing an email on his iPhone without even bothering to look up at her. Lauren stood up, her legs shaking but her spine straight. "You're kicking me out. Onto the street? I'm carrying your children. Carter." He finally stopped typing and looked at her. His eyes were cold, entirely detached. "Don't make this ugly, Lauren. You'll get a small, quiet settlement. Just for appearances. That's more than fair for your time." "Appearances," she repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'm not a corporate press release, Carter." His jaw tightened in annoyance. "You never understood the reality of business. Love doesn't scale. Optics do." Something fragile and essential inside her broke quietly at those words. She walked slowly into the master bedroom and saw that all the personal family photos were already gone. The heavy silver frame of their joyful wedding picture had been replaced by a sterile, blank spot on the polished nightstand. The massive walk-in closet had already been emptied of all his custom suits. He'd already moved out physically, and clearly, he had moved on emotionally a long time ago. A massive moving truck was already idling loudly on the street. Outside, She packed exactly what she could carry. The black and white ultrasound prints. Her diamond wedding ring, which she refused to wear another second. And a small, taped Amazon box filled with tiny newborn socks she'd excitedly ordered just last week. Each small item felt infinitely heavier than solid gold. Naomi arrived mere minutes later, her designer heels clicking aggressively across the marble floor. "He's already freezing your credit cards," she said. Quickly, her eyes flashing with anger. "I just saw the bank alert come through." Lauren nodded slowly, handing her the printed copy of the contract. "Let him. I'll survive." Carter stood at the doorway of the bedroom, checking his watch, looking incredibly impatient. "Don't drag this out, Lauren. The press already thinks we officially separated months ago." Naomi turned sharply on her heel, pointing a manicured finger at his chest. "You should worry significantly less about the press, Carter, and a whole lot more about the SEC when they find out you actively used company money for your own personal image branding." Carter smirked, completely unfazed. "That's an empty threat, Naomi. You don't have a shred of proof." Lauren zipped her suitcase shut with a sharp, final sound and met his eyes one. "Absolute last time. I used to believe you were ruthless simply because you wanted massive success. Now I see the truth. You were ruthless because you desperately wanted total control." He stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You'll deeply regret crossing me." She stared right back into his hollow eyes. "I already do." Naomi took her hand firmly. Together, they walked out and left the penthouse. The heavy metal elevator doors closed seamlessly, permanently sealing the beautiful life she once had behind cold, mirrored glass. Outside, fresh snow lightly dusted the concrete steps. Lauren tightened her wool coat around herself, physically feeling the heavy, precious weight of her unborn children. "Where to now?" Naomi asked gently as they reached the curb. Lauren exhaled a long, shaky breath, watching the white vapor fade slowly into the freezing Manhattan air. "Somewhere honest," she said softly. Directly across the street, idling quietly behind dark, tinted glass, Gabriel. Sterling's luxury car waited once again. It was the exact same position as that terrible night at the plaza. His private driver glanced in the rearview mirror and asked, "Sir, do we follow her?" Gabriel hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes tracking Lauren's resilient posture, then nodded once. "Yes, but not too close." Because for the very first time in her life, someone powerful wasn't watching her to use her or judge her. He was watching to protect her. The famous River Cafe shimmered beautifully beneath the towering arches of the Brooklyn Bridge. Its massive glass windows glowed like warm candlelight against the dark, rushing waters of the East River. Snow drifted softly and silently. Outside, as the towering, illuminated skyline of Manhattan reflected perfectly on the black water, Lauren sat entirely alone at a quiet corner table. Her heavy coat was draped casually over the back of the chair, and both of her hands were wrapped tightly around a delicate porcelain cup of mint tea that had already gone completely cold. Naomi had adamantly insisted she meet someone tonight. Someone who might genuinely be able to help her. But, as Naomi had warned, not in the way you think. Lauren had been incredibly hesitant. After everything that had just transpired, giving away her trust felt like an absurd luxury she could no longer afford. Then, the maitre d' appeared silently at her elbow. "Mr. Sterling is ready for you now." Gabriel Sterling stood up politely as she approached his secluded table. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably composed. His sheer presence effortlessly filled the elegant room without ever seeming to demand it. He wore a dark charcoal suit, the specific kind of garment tailored in quiet wealth and silence, not loud vanity. On the crisp white tablecloth, right beside his silver Mont Blanc pen, rested a single, thick document folder and 2 plates of completely untouched creme brulee. "Miss Hayes," he said quietly, respectfully offering his hand. "Thank you so much for coming." Lauren hesitated for a brief moment before taking it and shaking it. His grip was remarkably firm and steady. It wasn't possessive, and it certainly wasn't pitying. She sat down, keeping her posture straight. "I know this feels incredibly strange," Gabriel continued, taking his seat. "But after witnessing what happened at the plaza, I simply couldn't stay silent. What your husband did to you wasn't just casually cruel, it was highly calculated." Her eyes narrowed slightly in suspicion. "You were actually there?" He nodded once. "I was an early investor in Reed Technologies long before he ever went public. I saw firsthand exactly how he built absolutely everything on fake optics and media manipulation. When I saw him proudly announce a fashion model instead of acknowledging his pregnant wife, I understood immediately. He wasn't just launching a corporate partnership. He was actively erasing a liability." Lauren's throat tightened painfully. "And you think I'm a liability, too?" Gabriel leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "No. I think you're the absolute only part of that entire story that was ever real." For a long moment, a heavy, profound silence filled the intimate space between them. It was broken only by the melodic, soothing sound of soft jazz playing faintly from the restaurant speakers. She took a deep breath, trying desperately to steady her racing heart. "Why help me?" she asked. "You barely even know me." He smiled, a faint, knowing expression. "Because I know him. And because absolutely no one should ever have to fight someone like Carter Reed alone." He slowly slid the heavy folder across the tablecloth toward her. Inside were dozens of photocopies of transaction receipts, corporate company expenses, falsely marked as brand consultancy and image partnership fees, all explicitly, undeniably linked directly to Sloan Vega. Naomi had been absolutely right. The smoking gun proof existed. Lauren looked up at him, genuinely startled. How did you possibly get these? Anonymous tips, he said, his eyes perfectly steady and unreadable. But if you decide to use them, you must use them very carefully. I am absolutely not offering you petty revenge, Lauren. I'm offering you real leverage. Her gaze drifted away, looking out the large window. Outside, the dazzling city. Lights rippled and fractured in the river's strong current, looking just like her life right now, unsteady, turbulent, but undeniably moving forward. She whispered, leverage doesn't magically fix a broken home. No, Gabriel replied softly, respectfully, but it definitely gives you the ultimate power to decide exactly what comes next. Their waiter arrived silently, discreetly refilling her cup of hot tea. As he reached across the table, she noticed Gabriel's wrist. He wore a beautiful, but incredibly old, worn leather watch. It wasn't flashy or diamond-encrusted. It was the quiet accessory of a man who absolutely didn't need shiny gold to prove his inherent worth to the world. You seem like exactly the kind of man who doesn't do charity, she said, cautiously measuring him. He met her eyes directly. I don't. I only invest in things that actually matter. For the very first time in agonizing weeks, she smiled. It was small. It was incredibly tired, but it was profoundly real. When they finally stepped outside the restaurant, the fresh snow crunched loudly beneath their expensive shoes. The massive bridge lights glowed brilliantly. Above them, casting a beautiful, ethereal silver sheen over the dark river. Gabriel turned to her before she got into her waiting car. There's an elite clinic uptown that specifically specializes in high-risk pregnancies. My family's foundation heavily supports it. I can make a call and get you the best care. Lauren hesitated, pulling her coat tighter. You really don't owe me that. He shook his head slowly. No, but you and your children absolutely deserve a safe, secure start. The freezing winter wind carried the faint, bracing scent of the river, cold, honest, and incredibly alive. She looked up at the towering Manhattan skyline and whispered into the night air, maybe this massive city isn't quite done with me yet. Gabriel smiled slightly, a glint of deep admiration in his eyes. Maybe it's just finally starting to notice you. As she stepped into the warmth of the waiting car, she didn't realize that this quiet, tense dinner would become the very first ripple in a massive, uncontrollable storm that would soon violently upend absolutely everything Carter Reed thought he securely controlled. And from the towering bridge high above, the glittering lights of Manhattan shimmered like pure destiny, silently, watching her take her very first real step forward. The bright morning sun sliced sharply through the towering glass towers of Wall Street, painting incredibly long, dramatic shadows across the opulent boardroom of Reed Technologies. Carter Reed stood proudly at the head of the massive, custom mahogany table. He was completely surrounded by wealthy investors, slick publicists, and highly paid legal advisors. The giant digital screen mounted directly behind him repeatedly flashed glowing headlines from last night's gala, his arm wrapped tightly around Sloane Vega, his bright, winning grin looking absolutely perfect, his cruel betrayal permanently immortalized for the world to consume. "Look at these incredible engagement numbers," Carter said arrogantly, smirking in satisfaction as he quickly scrolled through the live social media analytics. On his iPad, our corporate rebrand went completely viral. We've organically added over 30,000 new followers just overnight. This, gentlemen, is exactly how you masterfully turn a personal narrative into massive market confidence. His chief of PR, a sharp, seasoned woman named Jenna, shifted incredibly, uncomfortably in her leather chair. "The main problem, sir, is that your personal narrative currently has a very real heartbeat. The pregnant wife you just publicly left. People are definitely starting to talk online." Carter's strong jaw tensed in immediate annoyance. "She is completely irrelevant. Now, I explicitly told your team to scrub her presence from absolutely all of our past press photos. I want you to keep the media focus entirely on Sloane." But the tabloids unfortunately picked up a candid shot of her crying outside the Plaza Hotel. It's currently trending in the top 10 on Twitter. Carter's expression darkened into something menacing. "Then drown it out with louder noise. Push out new, flashy content. Post the details of the Cartier partnership. Leak the behind-the-scenes Beverly Hills photo shoot. Do whatever it takes to bury her." He was so consumed by his own hubris that he completely didn't notice the quiet, unassuming assistant sitting in the back corner of the room, typing notes. Furiously, silently and meticulously recording every single word he said. Meanwhile, entirely across town, Naomi Brooks sat in her much more modest, chaotic office. She was completely surrounded by towering stacks of case files and half-empty coffee cups. Her secure phone suddenly buzzed with a highly encrypted message from an anonymous number. "If you desperately want hard proof of Carter's misuse of corporate funds, look very closely at the brand invoices. Sloane Vega absolutely isn't on his personal payroll. She's officially listed as a highly paid corporate consultant." Naomi instantly forwarded the explosive message to Lauren. "It's so much worse than we initially thought. He's not just a heartless bastard, he is actively committing massive federal fraud." Lauren sat quietly by the frosty window of the small, unassuming apartment Naomi had helped her quickly rent. Thick snowflakes drifted lazily outside, looking incredibly soft against the harsh, loud backdrop of the city noise. She placed a highly protective hand gently on her swelling belly, physically feeling the twins shift and kick inside her. "So, he essentially paid for his mistress using his investors' company money," she summarized, her voice flat. Naomi nodded enthusiastically through the phone. "Exactly. Luxury trips, Five-star hotels, massive designer ad campaigns, all cleverly hidden under the corporate operating budget that legally and entirely voids your airtight prenup. He thought he successfully buried you in complex legal traps, but he actually just dug his own massive grave. Lauren stared out at the sprawling city skyline. She vividly remembered the countless, exhausting nights she had stayed up until dawn, meticulously editing Carter's sloppy pitch presentations. She remembered the long holiday weekends. She had willingly canceled family trips just so he could aggressively chase wealthy investors. Every single personal sacrifice she had ever made had slowly built the massive empire that he was now using to publicly humiliate her. Back on Park Avenue, Carter leaned back comfortably in his plush leather executive chair, arrogantly twirling his expensive Mont Blanc pen between his fingers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the room with supreme, unearned confidence, "we are operating in the ruthless business of perception. Sad. Emotions absolutely don't sell products. Raw power does. Sloan perfectly embodies the future of this brand. Youth, vibrant energy, flawless beauty." An older, highly respected board member cleared his throat loudly. "And what about your pregnant wife?" Carter laughed, a dry, completely soulless sound. "Collateral damage." The entire boardroom went chillingly silent. Only the faint, mechanical hum of the overhead projector filled the tense space. He was so incredibly arrogant he didn't even notice that Gabriel Sterling's personal assistant had been quietly sitting in on the meeting as an agreed-upon observer, part of a massive corporate merger negotiation that Carter desperately, hungrily wanted to close. The silent assistant took detailed notes, ensuring every single cruel word was carefully documented. Gabriel had requested it personally. Later that same afternoon, Gabriel sat alone in his own sprawling, minimalist office overlooking the gray waters of the Hudson River, intensely reviewing the typed transcript. He read Carter's specific phrase twice. Collateral damage. His strong jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He picked up his secure phone and immediately called Naomi. "This is Sterling. Please tell Lauren she is absolutely not alone in this fight anymore." Naomi exhaled a massive, shuddering breath, profound relief washing completely through her voice. "Do you really, truly mean that?" "I absolutely do not ever make empty promises," Gabriel said, his voice like cold steel. "And I absolutely do not tolerate weak men who continually confuse cruelty with true power." In the heavy, pregnant quiet that followed the call, Lauren sat and stared at the thick document folder Gabriel had sent over via courier earlier. It was the undeniable proof of Carter's massive deceit. It felt incredibly heavy in her shaking hands, not just because of the devastating legal implications it held, but because it finally, definitively confirmed what her breaking heart already inherently knew. Carter's entire glittering empire was built entirely on a foundation of toxic lies. She whispered fiercely to herself in the empty room, He callously turned our love into a cold business transaction. So, I will gladly turn the absolute truth into his justice. Outside her window, the millions of lights of Wall Street began to flicker on, brightly as cold dusk rapidly approached. Inside the soaring tower of Reed Technologies, Carter arrogantly lifted yet another crystal glass of champagne, toasting to record-breaking analytics and numbers he arrogantly thought would never, ever fall. He absolutely didn't know that the very woman he had so casually erased had just found the exact leverage needed to permanently end his kingdom. The dirty snow had melted into glittering, icy puddles along the length of Fifth Avenue, the busy street pulsing vibrantly with frantic winter shoppers and extravagant Christmas window displays. Lauren nervously adjusted the collar of her heavy coat as she pushed open the glass doors and entered Maison Duet. It was an incredibly quiet, highly exclusive tea salon discreetly tucked away between the glittering facades of Tiffany and Company and Cartier. Naomi had hastily arranged the secret meeting, but hadn't said exactly with whom, only that it was incredibly important to your future. Inside the opulent salon, the soft, delicate chime of fine porcelain cups and the low, polite murmur of extremely wealthy conversations filled the warm, fragrant air. A snobby, impeccably dressed hostess silently led her to a secluded, private table near the large bay window. Waiting there was an older woman who effortlessly exuded the specific kind of absolute, unwavering calm that only ever came from wealth that was entirely too old to ever need proving. Her beautiful silver hair was tied back flawlessly and neatly, and a string of flawless, massive pearls rested elegantly against the lapel of her tailored navy blazer. Mrs. Sterling, Lauren greeted her incredibly softly, instantly recognizing her striking features. It was Eleanor Sterling. She was the formidable matriarch of the entire Sterling family, mother to Gabriel, and widely known as one of Manhattan's most ruthless, quiet power brokers. "Please sit, my dear," Eleanor said, her tone perfectly polite but undeniably cool and assessing. "I absolutely do not drink coffee. It is far too aggressive for my heart. Tea gently reminds me that there is immense power and grace in true stillness." Lauren smiled a very faint, polite smile and sat down across from her. A delicate, silver teapot steamed quietly between them, releasing the intoxicating, floral scent of fresh jasmine into the air. "I hear through the grapevine that you've recently met my son," Eleanor began, slowly and deliberately stirring her china cup. "And I hear that he's taken quite a profound, sudden interest in your unfortunate situation." Lauren immediately straightened her posture, entirely unsure where this intense interrogation was heading. "He has been incredibly kind to me. Significantly. More than he ever needed to be." "That is exactly what deeply worries me," Eleanor replied smoothly, her pale eyes razor-sharp. "Gabriel's legendary kindness often walks hand in hand with extreme recklessness. He has bravely saved desperate people before, Only two. Eventually drown in the middle of their chaotic storms. Lauren felt a sudden, defensive heat rise rapidly to her pale cheeks. With all due respect, Mrs. Sterling, I absolutely didn't ask him for rescuing. He freely offered his help because he clearly possesses a strong moral conscience, something your elite world seems to constantly treat like a fatal weakness. Eleanor's perfectly painted lips twitched slightly into a very small, highly approving smile. You definitely have a fiery spirit. Good. You will absolutely need it. Do you actually have any idea what being a part of this specific family truly means? Miss Hayes. Lauren met her intense, evaluating gaze incredibly steadily. It means heavy responsibility. It means constant public scrutiny. It means impossible expectations. Yes, I've already lived that exact kind of exhausting life once. Before. Just without the protection of the money. For the very first time during the meeting, Eleanor looked almost genuinely surprised. You actually think I simply measure people's worth by their bank accounts? Lauren shook her head firmly. No. But your exclusive circle absolutely does. Carter's toxic world brutally taught me that genuine love and perfect public image rarely, if ever, manage to survive in the exact same room. The formidable older woman studied her intensely for a very long, silent moment. Then, she slowly reached into her priceless designer handbag and placed a beautiful, pristine garment box gently on the table. Inside the tissue paper was a breathtaking, delicate black dress. It was incredibly simple, profoundly elegant, and perfectly tailored. This is absolutely not a charity gift, Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a serious register. It is a formal invitation. My family's foundation is hosting a massive, highly publicized charity dinner next week. If you truly, deeply want to stand proudly beside Gabriel in this life, you will first have to prove you can stand fearlessly in front of the entirety of Manhattan. Lauren hesitated, looking down at the beautiful fabric. Why me? Eleanor's strict voice finally softened just a fraction. Because you strongly remind me of the brave woman I used to be, long before I ever learned to hide all my scars behind polite society etiquette. Because you are absolutely not afraid to openly bleed in public, and that raw honesty completely terrifies weak men like Carter Reed. A heavy, profound silence stretched out comfortably between them, broken only by the incredibly faint, rhythmic sound of footsteps hurrying outside in the snow. Lauren slowly traced her fingers along the delicate gold edge of her teacup, profoundly realizing that this absolutely wasn't just a simple society test. It was a massive, heavy door swinging open. She lifted her chin proudly. I'll be there. Eleanor nodded highly approvingly, elegantly pouring them both more hot tea. Then you must start by standing incredibly tall, even when your knees are shaking in terror. This world heavily respects icy composure significantly more than it respects the messy truth. But sometimes, Holding on to the absolute truth is the only real composure you have left. As Lauren finally left the warm salon, the brilliant city lights reflected beautifully off the wet pavement, casting glowing gold halos around her careful steps. The box containing the black dress weighed incredibly lightly in her arms, yet it symbolically represented something infinitely heavier, the undeniable beginning of her triumphant return to the exact world Carter had so brutally stolen from her. Directly across the busy street, Gabriel waited patiently in the back of his idling car. He saw the fierce, unyielding resolve shining clearly on her face, and smiled incredibly quietly to himself. She absolutely didn't need any rescuing. She was already aggressively rebuilding herself, piece by powerful piece. And somewhere high above the glittering lights of Fifth Avenue, the very first jagged crack finally appeared in Carter Reed's fragile illusion of absolute control. Manhattan shimmered brilliantly below them like a vast, glittering sea of spun gold. From the towering, exclusive rooftop of Gabriel Sterling's penthouse, the famous skyline looked infinite and unconquerable. Every single lit window represented a beating pulse. Every busy street told a different story. Fat white snowflakes floated lazily and beautifully in the freezing night air. Lauren stood quietly near the thick glass railing, wrapped securely in a luxurious, heavy wool coat that Eleanor had thoughtfully sent to her apartment. Earlier that evening, the sprawling city stretched out endlessly before her, dazzling, completely merciless, but undeniably, electrically alive. Inside the warm penthouse, Gabriel quietly poured 2 steaming cups of chamomile tea. There was absolutely no expensive champagne, no loud string orchestra, just a profound, comfortable quiet. He walked out and joined her by the freezing railing, his warm breath highly visible in the biting cold. "You handled my formidable mother incredibly well today," he said, a distinct hint of a proud smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Lauren gave a very small, breathy laugh, watching the snow fall. "I honestly thought she might have her security team escort me out of the salon halfway through the tea service." "She is incredibly particular," Gabriel admitted warmly, "but she deeply respects genuine, unyielding strength. When she challenged you, you didn't flinch." Lauren looked straight down at the thousands of bright lights reflecting off the dark waters of the Hudson River. "Flinching doesn't actually stop the terrible things from happening," she said incredibly softly. "It just makes cruel people confidently believe that you're easily breakable." He turned his head and studied her beautiful profile in the moonlight. She looked incredibly calm, undeniably beautiful, but she was visibly carrying the quiet, crushing weight of absolutely everything she'd so recently lost. "You really don't have to keep fighting this war all alone," he said. She slowly turned her head toward him, her dark eyes actively searching his face for hidden motives. "You barely even know me, Gabriel." "I intimately know deep pain when I see it," he replied softly. "And I know true, rare integrity when I see it," especially when it absolutely doesn't. Desperately ask for public attention. A heavy, incredibly intimate silence hung warmly between them in the freezing air. He slowly reached his hand deep into his tailored coat pocket. He absolutely didn't pull out a velvet ring box, but instead produced a neatly folded, thick sheet of legal paper. I personally drafted something for you, he said incredibly carefully, handing it to her. It is a highly private, ironclad legal agreement. There are no sleazy lawyers involved, no leaky publicity. It explicitly states that if we choose to legally join our lives together, you will remain 100% completely independent. Your financial assets, your personal choices, your public voice, they will all remain absolutely, entirely yours. She blinked down at the paper, completely startled by the proposition. Join our lives? Gabriel exhaled a long, steady breath. Lauren, I am absolutely not offering you a fairy tale rescue. I am offering you an equal, powerful partnership, a legal marriage, if you'll allow it, and absolutely not out of some misplaced sense of pity. I'm doing this because I desperately want to build something incredibly real and something completely safe for you and for the twins. Her heart instantly pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. You can't possibly be serious. This is insane. I absolutely do not do anything in my life halfway. She took a panicked step backward, utterly confused by the speed of it all. Gabriel, this really isn't the right time for this. I'm heavily pregnant with another man's children. I'm completely broke. I'm emotionally broken. I'm alive, he interrupted her incredibly gently, his eyes fierce. And you are significantly more courageous than absolutely anyone I know. The biting city wind violently caught her dark hair, brushing it wildly across her pale face. People in your circle will instantly think you're only marrying me out of petty revenge against Carter, she whispered. Then let them think whatever they want, Gabriel said dismissively. The massive difference between Carter and me is that I absolutely do not care about public perception. I only care about achieving peace. For a very long, agonizing moment, she said absolutely nothing in response. The massive skyline glittered brightly around them. The faint sound of angry car horns echoing up from the streets far below. Finally, she looked back up at his steady, waiting face. If we actually do this crazy thing, she said, her voice shaking but finding its strength, it has to be strictly on my terms. Absolutely no press announcements. No fake staged paparazzi photos. No pretending this is a magical fairy tale. He smiled a genuine, breathtaking smile. Then it will officially be the absolute most honest, real marriage the city of Manhattan has ever seen. She actually laughed, hot tears of relief spilling over her freezing cheeks. You're completely impossible. Not impossible, he corrected her smoothly, gently pressing the legal document firmly into her hand. just incredibly persistent. Lauren opened the paper and read it line by meticulous line under the patio. Lights. Every single typed word was incredibly deliberate, fiercely protective, and undeniably freeing. There were absolutely no hidden legal traps, no toxic power plays, no manipulative fine print specifically written to cage her in. It was a document of pure, unadulterated equality. She folded it carefully back up and met his intense gaze. "I'll deeply think about it." "Of course you will," Gabriel said softly. "But just for the official record, this city ruthlessly runs on corporate deals. I highly prefer making promises. Far below them, the endless, streaming lights of Park Avenue blurred together, like glowing constellations." She briefly thought of Carter, of how their toxic marriage had spectacularly begun in a blinding flurry of flashbulbs and cameras, and had agonizingly ended in absolute, devastating silence. And yet, here stood a powerful man offering her absolutely nothing to prove to the world. Just the miraculous, quiet chance to finally breathe again. The wind aggressively picked up, violently scattering fresh snow across the dark rooftop. Gabriel slowly reached out for her cold hand, but he respectfully didn't pull her close to his body. He just stood solidly beside her. The physical distance between them felt incredibly honest, respectful, and almost sacred. Lauren whispered into the night, "If I eventually say yes to this, it will strictly be because I actively choose peace, not because I need an escape." He nodded slowly in complete understanding. "Then please, only say yes when that peace finally feels exactly like home." And standing high beneath the glowing Manhattan skyline, in the exact city where brutal betrayal had once completely broken her spirit, a brand new, incredibly powerful kind of promise quietly took deep root in her soul. The incredibly sterile, sharp scent of medical disinfectant completely filled the small, white examination room, softened only by the faint, rhythmic, mechanical hum of the high-tech ultrasound machine. Lauren lay incredibly still on the crinkly paper of the cushioned examination table, her pale hands nervously clutching the edges of the thin, blue hospital blanket. Gabriel sat rigidly in the plastic chair right beside her. He looked visibly, endearingly out of his element in this bright, white coat world of intimate prenatal care. His usually buzzing cell phone was completely turned off, and his silk tie was uncharacteristically loosened around his neck. For the very first time in his hyper-focused adult years, corporate business simply wasn't his number one priority. The kind older doctor gently adjusted the ultrasound probe on Lauren's stomach and smiled a warm, reassuring smile at the screen. "All right, Mrs. Sterling." "Oh, my apologies, Miss Hayes. Let's take a very good look here." Lauren's breath violently caught in her throat, her eyes glued to the monitor. On the grainy, black and white screen, two very small, distinct flickers magically appeared. They were perfectly steady, rapid, and undeniably alive. I clearly see 2 strong heartbeats, the doctor said warmly, pointing at the screen. Congratulations to you both. You're definitely having twins. Her dark eyes welled up with hot tears instantly. Absolutely all the paralyzing fear, the horrific public humiliation, and the crushing, suffocating loneliness of the past few months seemed to magically melt away in one quiet, profound moment of pure awe. Gabriel leaned much closer to the screen, intensely watching the 2 tiny, blurry shapes move erratically across the monitor. He didn't speak a single word. He just smiled a devastatingly genuine smile, his strong jaw tightening, visibly, exactly as if he were desperately trying to hold back a massive wave of raw emotion. Lauren whispered, her voice cracking. 2 of them. I honestly thought maybe the intense loneliness I felt was some kind of cruel punishment. But maybe, my body was just desperately making enough space for both of them. The doctor gently wiped the gel away and handed her the freshly printed ultrasound image. They're incredibly strong and measuring perfectly, she said. Kindly. Just make sure you keep resting. Eat incredibly well. And please, heavily limit your emotional stress. Gabriel's protective gaze shifted sharply at the specific word stress. He immediately made a firm, unbreakable mental note. There would be absolutely no more incoming phone calls allowed about Carter. There would be no more toxic late night scrolling through the news. From this exact moment on, absolute, unshakable peace was going to be a mandatory part of her medical treatment plan. Immediately after the emotional appointment, they walked slowly together through the crisp, freezing Manhattan air. The bright winter sun glinted blindingly off the towering glass skyscrapers around them. Gabriel gently but firmly insisted they stop and sit at a warm Starbucks directly across the busy street. You really shouldn't walk too far in the cold without eating something, he said protectively. She smiled a very faint, amused smile. You honestly sound exactly like Eleanor. Right now. She'd probably highly approve of that command. He replied with a soft chuckle, gently handing her a steaming paper cup of decaf, herbal tea, and a warm pastry. They sat quietly together by the large plate glass window. Outside, yellow cabs honked aggressively. Millions of people hurried frantically through their chaotic lives. But inside their small corner, time completely paused. Lauren intensely studied the grainy sonogram print in her shaking hand. It was the very first piece of tangible, undeniable proof that her battered heart possessed the miraculous ability to multiply its capacity for love, even immediately after being completely shattered into a million pieces. Do you ever think about the concept of fate? She asked incredibly quietly. Not. Looking up from the photo, Gabriel slowly stirred his black coffee, his eyes thoughtful. Every single day. Mostly about how fate absolutely doesn't care one bit about our meticulously laid plans. I used to foolishly think that true success was all about supporting and sharing someone else's big dream. she said softly, thinking of her years. Serving Carter. Now, I just desperately want to build my own. He looked at her with that incredibly steady, unreadable, grounding calm that always managed to make her feel entirely safe. Then build it, he said simply. You absolutely don't need anyone's permission to do so. Not from Carter. And certainly not from me. Her throat tightened painfully with sudden, overwhelming emotion. Do you really, truly think I can successfully start completely over? I don't just think it, Gabriel said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. I know it. His powerful words landed between them like a quiet, unbreakable promise. Suddenly, a bright notification flashed briefly on his sleek Apple Watch. It was an urgent, encrypted message from his lead PR assistant. Carter's PR firm is aggressively spinning a massive, fake story to the press about your personal involvement with Lauren. Shall we officially respond to the allegations? He completely ignored it, casually turning his wrist face down on the table to hide the screen. Lauren absolutely didn't need to know about the incoming attack. Not today. Today was sacred. When they finally arrived back at his sprawling, secure apartment, Eleanor was already there waiting for them, a very rare, genuine softness shining in her usually sharp eyes. How exactly did the appointment go? Lauren smiled brightly and handed the older woman the grainy ultrasound print. Eleanor's manicured hands actually trembled ever so slightly as she looked closely at the image. Two of them, she murmured, a genuine smile breaking across her face. Twins. Actually run quite heavily in our family bloodline. You know. Maybe it's a sign from the universe, Gabriel said with a charming grin, taking off his coat. Eleanor glanced sharply at him over the photo. It's a clear sign that God still deeply loves and rewards women who know how to endure. That evening, Lauren sat comfortably on the plush velvet couch, the glittering city lights flickering beautifully through the massive floor-to-ceiling window. The luxurious apartment smelled faintly of warm cinnamon tea and the lingering scent of winter rain. She gently traced the blurry outline of the sonogram with her fingertip, whispering incredibly softly to the two tiny lives growing inside her. You're my beautiful beginning. Not my rescue, and definitely not my revenge. Just my perfect beginning. Across the large room, Gabriel worked incredibly quietly on his MacBook, expertly pretending he wasn't actively listening to her every word. But the exact moment she whispered those profound words, he stopped typing and looked up, smiling deeply and genuinely to himself in the dark. For the very first time in agonizing months, the heavy air in her lungs finally felt light, and the silence in the room felt incredibly warm. And somewhere deep, inside that tiny, grainy print of two fluttering heartbeats, Lauren Hayes finally found the absolute proof she needed that love, real, unconditional love, was still very much alive. The very next morning, brilliant sunlight spilled warmly across the massive marble kitchen island as Lauren peacefully poured oatmeal into a ceramic bowl. She felt significantly calmer and more centered than she had in agonizing months. But true peace, she was rapidly and painfully learning, had an incredibly short lifespan when you lived in a toxic world absolutely addicted to cheap public spectacle. Her cell phone suddenly buzzed violently on the counter. At first, she blissfully ignored it, wanting to preserve the quiet morning. Then, Naomi's name flashed urgently across the glowing screen, directly followed by one terrifying, capitalized line of text. Don't panic, but Carter's PR team is moving incredibly fast today. Lauren's heart dropped into her stomach. She quickly swiped the screen open to check the news. The top, glaring headline on absolutely every single major gossip site and tabloid blog read, ex-CEO's pregnant wife finds quick comfort in billionaire rival's arms. Was a secret affair the real reason for their shocking split? Her stomach turned violently with nausea. The lengthy, vicious article was completely full of heavily distorted half-truths, fabricated quotes from anonymous close friends, and blatant, disgusting lies actively framing Gabriel as her savior billionaire, whom she had been sleeping with behind Carter's back. The final photo attached to the article hit her the hardest. It was a high-resolution, zoomed-in paparazzi shot of Gabriel walking closely beside her on the sidewalk immediately after yesterday's private doctor's appointment. His strong hand was shown gently, protectively supporting her elbow as she navigated the icy pavement. The cruel, insinuating caption read, "Too close for mere coincidence." Naomi called her immediately, her voice tight with anger. It is a massively coordinated, highly expensive smear campaign, Lauren. They are aggressively framing you as a calculating gold digger who simply jumped from one massive wallet to another. It's a classic, ruthless Carter Reed PR strategy. Lauren sank heavily onto the kitchen stool, her entire body physically trembling with rage and fear. He's maliciously using my high-risk pregnancy against me, again as a weapon. That is exactly his pathetic playbook, Naomi said grimly through the phone. Control the public story, and you completely control the public sympathy. But listen to me carefully. This time, his massive ego made him overplay his hand. He stupidly used official corporate media accounts and company funds to actively push this fake narrative to the tabloids. That is legally company property. I can easily trace the digital footprint back to him. Gabriel walked into the bright kitchen just as she ended the call. His secure phone had already been blowing up nonstop since 6 a.m. with frantic calls from panicked investors, aggressive reporters, and his own PR team. "Lauren," he said, his deep voice remaining incredibly steady and calm. "Please, don't look at the news today. It is all just desperate, meaningless noise." "I already read it," she whispered, tears of profound frustration pricking her eyes. "They're actively calling me a public scandal. They're ruining your reputation, too." He immediately set his ringing phone face down on the counter and knelt gracefully on the hard floor directly in front of her chair. "Look right at me." She did. "You are absolutely not a scandal. You are a fiercely protective mother. You are an incredible survivor. Do not ever let his pathetic lies rewrite the absolute truth of who you are." Her eyes filled with hot tears. "But the public blindly believes him. They always do." "Then we will gladly show them the undeniable truth," Gabriel said, his eyes flashing with a dangerous, protective fire. "But absolutely not yet. In this kind of war, timing is absolutely everything." He stood up gracefully and walked over to the massive window, looking out over the sprawling skyline. Carter thrives on creating absolute chaos. He desperately wants you emotionally rattled, so you'll make a stupid, public mistake. But there is one crucial thing about power that he completely fails to understand. Calm, patient people are the ones who actually win wars. Lauren exhaled a long, incredibly shaky breath, feeling his calm energy ground her. "You honestly sound exactly like you've successfully fought a few of these wars before." He smiled a very faint, lethal smile, significantly more than I ever wanted to. "But this specific one, this one is entirely different." Later that same afternoon, Naomi arrived at the penthouse carrying her heavy laptop and a thick stack of files. "You're definitely going to want to see this," she said grimly, quickly connecting her computer to the massive living room TV screen. Carter's highly anticipated new ad campaign with Sloan just officially launched globally. They are aggressively selling him to the public as the ultimate face of second chances and personal reinvention. The high-budget commercial began to play. It showed Carter looking incredibly handsome in a crisp white shirt, the sleeves casually rolled up to show his forearms, walking romantically hand in hand along a pristine, sun-drenched beach, with Sloan, who was twirling in a flowing, designer silk dress. The emotional, acoustic music swelled as the bold tagline appeared on the screen: "Love rebuilt, stronger." Lauren stared blankly at the massive screen, her jaw clenching so hard her teeth ached. "He is literally paying millions to rewrite our history while I'm still sitting here actively living through the agonizing pain of it." Naomi smirked, a sharp, dangerous, lawyer's smirk. "Then let's make him choke to death on his own fake narrative." She quickly opened a secure digital folder prominently labeled unauthorized expenses. Inside the folder were dozens of high-resolution, scanned receipts taken directly from Carter's highly restricted corporate accounts. There were massive charges for 5-star luxury hotel suites in Beverly Hills, 6-figure custom jewelry invoices, and even multiple first-class international airline tickets for Sloan, all fraudulently filed under a completely fake corporate consulting title. "I've successfully, legally confirmed absolutely all of it," Naomi said proudly. "He is actively using his shareholders' investment money for his own lavish personal indulgence. That absolutely isn't just a juicy tabloid scandal anymore. Lauren, that is massive federal corporate fraud." Gabriel's expression instantly hardened into unyielding stone. Get me hard. Copies of everything in that folder. Quietly. I will personally make sure the exact right people on Wall Street see them when the perfect time comes. Lauren hesitated, her inherent goodness warring with her pain. I really don't want to seek petty revenge. Gabriel. You absolutely are not getting petty revenge, Gabriel said incredibly gently, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. You are simply reclaiming the absolute truth. That night, as the massive city buzzed relentlessly outside the glass, Lauren sat alone by the window, her pale reflection faint but resolute in the glass. She gently touched her stomach, whispering fiercely to the sleeping twins, I absolutely won't let him turn us into his tragic, pathetic story ever again. Directly behind her in the study, Gabriel was on his secure phone, speaking in incredibly low, calm, lethal tones to someone very powerful on Wall Street. The intimidating man who had once represented nothing but ruthless corporate power was now utilizing every ounce of it strictly to defend her fragile peace. Outside, the massive digital billboards high above Times Square flickered brightly with Carter's perfectly photoshopped, smiling face standing right beside Sloane. But somewhere high above the city in a quiet, secure apartment, his devastating next headline was already being meticulously written by the exact woman he arrogantly thought he'd permanently erased. Beverly Hills was completely soaked in blinding, golden California sun. Every single towering palm tree stood perfectly still, looking exactly like it was perpetually posing for a high-fashion magazine photo shoot. Sloane Vega stood languidly on the sweeping marble terrace of her massive, rented, luxury villa. She was dressed in expensive, flowing silk pajamas, her phone angled perfectly in the air to catch her flawless reflection in the infinity pool behind her. Her millions of devoted followers eagerly waited for their daily morning dose of curated perfection. And, as a professional, she flawlessly gave it to them, a staged, artisan latte, a practiced, dazzling smile, and a deeply hypocritical, philosophical caption, true love always magically finds the brave. But that specific morning, her fabricated courage looked a whole lot like rising, sheer panic. Her aggressive talent manager, Derek, violently stormed out onto the sunny terrace, angrily holding a glowing tablet. We've got a massive, catastrophic problem today, he barked, not even bothering to say good morning. The major brand investors want to immediately freeze your new endorsement deal until Carter's impending financial audit completely clears. There is incredibly loud noise on the street about his massive misuse of corporate funds. Sloane frowned deeply, her perfect smile vanishing as she set down her prop coffee cup. That is absolutely not my problem, Derek. I'm just the talent. It officially becomes your massive legal problem if the brand actually thinks you were illegally paid with stolen corporate money, he replied sharply. His face red. Lauren Hayes's ruthless lawyers have been aggressively digging around in the corporate accounts. That specific name hit Sloane's ego exactly like a physical slap across the face. Lauren Hayes. The pathetic, pregnant ghost that stubbornly, aggressively refused to vanish into the background where she belonged. Sloane dramatically tossed her perfectly styled hair, forcing a loud, dismissive laugh. She's literally a nobody. Derek. She's a washed-up, pregnant housewife. Her manager didn't even crack a smile. She's rapidly about to become a massive, global symbol of female empowerment. And you are standing right in her way. Across the country, deep in the heart of Manhattan, Lauren sat closely with Naomi and Gabriel at a sprawling mahogany conference table entirely covered in printed financial readouts and highlighted evidence. "Look at this specific one," Naomi said triumphantly, pointing a manicured finger to an exorbitant invoice labeled Image Consulting, West Coast Engagement. This single, massive corporate transfer illegally paid for Sloane's entire lavish Malibu Beach photo shoot. That is 100% stolen shareholder money. Gabriel's handsome expression remained perfectly, chillingly calm, but his deep tone was forged steel. He is aggressively laundering his luxury lifestyle, directly under the guise of corporate branding budgets. It's incredibly sloppy. Lauren hesitated, looking at the staggering numbers on the paper. What exactly happens if we publicly expose this to the press? Naomi looked up, her eyes blazing with legal anticipation. Then Carter's entire, carefully constructed empire completely collapses overnight. He'll instantly lose his wealthy investors. He'll be stripped of his board seat. And his pristine name will be ruined. Lauren slowly traced her trembling fingers across the damning papers. Then this isn't just about business anymore. It's about justice. Later that exact same afternoon, Gabriel received a highly encrypted message on his secure phone from an anonymous burner account. Attached to the message was a raw, unedited video clip. It showed Sloane during a chaotic, behind-the-scenes live stream in her dressing room, unknowingly caught mid-conversation with her personal stylist while the camera was still recording. In the damning, unfiltered clip, she laughed cruelly and said, "Carter's PR team is honestly so incredibly desperate right now. They actually had to turn his fat, pregnant wife into a campaign obstacle just to get sympathy. Can you even imagine being that sad and outdated?" The stylist in the video didn't laugh or answer her. He only glanced incredibly nervously at the blinking red light on the camera. Gabriel hit pause on the screen, a dark smirk forming. She honestly doesn't realize it yet, but this incredibly stupid video just permanently buried them both. Naomi grinned a terrifying, predatory grin. Public sympathy is exactly like a heavy boomerang. When it finally swings back around, it cuts deep. That evening, the raw video was mysteriously leaked to a major gossip outlet. Within mere hours, it completely flooded every single social media platform on Earth. Massive, trending hashtags exploded globally, pregnant and erased. Sloane speaks too much. The fickle internet violently and decisively turned on her. Tens of thousands of furious, hateful comments rapidly flooded in beneath all of Sloane's old, curated posts. You maliciously destroyed an innocent family. He left her heavily pregnant just for a fake, plastic sociopath like you. Absolutely disgusting behavior. Cancel her. Carter's secure phone lit up like a raging wildfire on his desk. Get that damn video taken down immediately, he barked aggressively at his panicked PR team. Over speakerphone. We absolutely can't. Sir, Jenna said, her voice shaking, her face pale on the video call. It's already absolutely everywhere. Even your own major shareholders are actively reposting it. Then immediately release a formal press statement. Carter snapped violently, losing all control. Say it's a deep fake. Say it's AI. It's already been fully verified as authentic audio. Sir, we can't lie about it. He violently slammed his heavy hand down onto his glass desk. The expensive Mont Blanc pen in his grip snapped cleanly in half, leaking black ink onto his fingers. Then find me a brand new damn story to sell them. But the devastating new story had already found him. Sloane's massive corporate sponsors began rapidly withdrawing their support to save their own brands. One by one, her highly lucrative, multi-million-dollar deals completely fell apart. Her elite social media manager quit in disgust. Within a staggering 24 hours, her massive, carefully cultivated follower count violently dropped by more than half. At the exact same time, emboldened investigative journalists dug significantly deeper into the leaks. Highly detailed, damning articles rapidly surfaced online, clearly showing the exact financial overlap between Sloane's exorbitant luxury expenses and Reed Technologies' official company payments. Every single designer bag, every private first-class flight, every diamond Cartier bracelet was meticulously documented in undeniable black and white. Back in the quiet safety of New York, Lauren watched the chaotic, breaking news in absolute silence. Gabriel glanced over at her from his laptop. You could easily take this significantly further right now. You could formally press federal charges. We could call a massive press conference and bury him. Lauren slowly shook her head, her eyes completely serene. No. I absolutely don't need to publicly humiliate him myself. I just desperately want the absolute truth to stand out in the light long enough for the world to finally see it. Naomi smiled incredibly softly, putting away her legal pads. That, my friend, is exactly how you win a war without ever getting your own hands dirty. Lauren turned her chair toward the massive window. The glittering city sparkled brilliantly, looking exactly like it was finally exhaling after a long, held breath. For the very first time in over a year, her name wasn't being mockingly whispered as a scandal. It was being spoken aloud with profound, deep respect. Far away in sunny Beverly Hills, a completely ruined Sloane slammed her laptop shut and stared blankly at her own reflection in the dark. Empty screen. For the very first time in her life, the flawless reflection didn't smile back at her. And in that terrifying, crushing silence, the massive empire Carter Reed had, built entirely on fake beauty and toxic lies, began to finally, spectacularly, crack wide open. Heavy, freezing rain hammered violently against the reinforced windows of the Upper East Side apartment, exactly as thunder rolled menacingly through the dark night sky. Lauren sat rigidly on the edge of the plush bed, one pale hand pressed incredibly tightly to her swollen belly. A sharp, excruciating pain suddenly shot directly through her lower back and abdomen. It was violent, sudden, and terrifyingly deep. She gasped out loud, unable to catch her breath. Gabriel, her voice trembled in sheer panic. He looked up instantly from the massive pile of legal papers scattered across the dining table, legal drafts, corporate financial reports, and damning news. Clippings about Carter's rapidly collapsing empire. In a fraction of an instant, he dropped his pen and was kneeling right at her side. Breathe, Lauren. Look at me and breathe, he commanded gently, his hands steadying her shoulders. How far apart are the contractions right now? 5 minutes, she gasped out, desperately clutching his strong arm. Gabriel. It's way too early. I'm only 34 weeks along. He didn't waste a single second panicking. He immediately grabbed the pre-packed hospital bag sitting by the door and swiftly called his private driver. Bring the car to the front. We're leaving right now. Outside the building, violent lightning lit up the entire Manhattan skyline like a massive, blinding camera flash. The heavy Mercedes S-Class aggressively cut through the raging storm, its thick tires hissing loudly across the slick, wet asphalt. Gabriel held Lauren's trembling hand tightly the entire agonizing way to the hospital, constantly whispering incredibly calm, grounding words that she barely heard over the roaring waves of physical pain. You're going to be completely okay. I'm right here with you. Just keep breathing for me. By the time they frantically reached the emergency entrance of Mount Sinai Hospital, the intense contractions had already doubled in severity. A swarm of nurses immediately rushed her onto a gurney and wheeled her aggressively into the bright, sterile delivery ward. The harsh, biting scent of medical antiseptic, the frantic, loud buzz of heart monitors, and the blinding, clinical, white lights, it all violently blurred together into a terrifying chaos. Mr. Sterling, we absolutely need you to wait outside in the hall, a stern, charge nurse said, attempting to physically block his path. He hesitated, his normally stoic face incredibly tight with raw, undisguised fear. No. I stay with her. Lauren turned her head weakly on the pillow, cold sweat beating heavily on her pale forehead. It's okay, she rasped, reaching out for him. Please. Just stay close. Don't leave me. He nodded firmly, pushing past the nurse and tightly gripping her hand again as The attending doctor quickly began preparing for the delivery. "You are incredibly strong," he whispered fiercely into her ear. "You have already bravely survived significantly worse pain than this." Agonizing minutes slowly stretched out into what felt like hours. Her rapid heartbeat raced wildly on the monitor. Then, suddenly, two distinct cries pierced the air. They were incredibly tiny, very raw, but absolutely perfect. The entire chaotic room seemed to momentarily freeze in awe. The exhausted doctor smiled warmly beneath her blue surgical mask. "Congratulations, Mom. You have a beautiful boy and a beautiful girl." Lauren completely broke down into heavy, exhausted sobs of pure relief. Gabriel's strong knees actually almost gave out from beneath him as he looked over at the two newborns. Their fragile skin was very pink and wrinkled. Their tiny, protesting cries piercing right through the noise of the thunderstorm. Outside, he leaned his head down and whispered something incredibly soft into Lauren's hair that she couldn't quite hear over the noise. It was maybe a silent prayer, or maybe just profound, overwhelming gratitude. But their beautiful, sacred moment of hard-won peace was violently shattered by the loud, aggressive buzz of Gabriel's secure phone vibrating in his coat pocket. He reluctantly pulled it out and glanced at the glowing screen. It was an urgent text message from his lead assistant. Carter just scheduled an impromptu emergency press conference. He is actively, publicly blaming you for massive corporate sabotage. Gabriel's handsome face instantly hardened into granite. He's desperately trying to deflect the blame, he muttered under his breath. Lauren, though physically exhausted, was highly alert and heard him clearly. "Please, don't go," she pleaded softly, squeezing his hand. "Not tonight. Please." He gently leaned down and kissed her damp forehead. "I am absolutely not leaving your side." Let him arrogantly talk himself directly into his own public grave. Outside in the chaotic city, hundreds of hungry reporters were already rapidly flooding social media platforms with live video clips of Carter Reed. He was standing defensively behind a wooden podium in the pouring rain, absolutely drenched in both arrogance and sheer, pathetic desperation. This highly coordinated, illegal digital attack on my successful company. Carter shouted into the microphones, trying to look like a victim, was entirely maliciously orchestrated by a jealous corporate competitor and his new mistress. The cruel, desperate words sliced through the digital airwaves like jagged glass. Within mere minutes of the broadcast, Naomi confidently texted Gabriel a single, powerful line: "Sit tight at the hospital. We are officially countering the narrative right now." Back in the quiet warmth of the hospital room, Lauren lovingly watched her tiny babies resting safely in the advanced incubator, the complex medical tubes and sensors looking incredibly fragile against their translucent skin. Her hot tears came very quietly this time. They were absolutely not tears of physical pain. And they certainly weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of absolute, profound clarity. He can stand out there and say whatever lies he wants to the cameras, she whispered softly, touching the incubator glass. But my absolute truth already has a heartbeat. Gabriel gently took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. You've already won the war, Lauren. And not just in the petty newspaper headlines. You won in real life. Hours later, peaceful, golden dawn slowly crept through the hospital blinds. The violent storm had finally completely passed over the city. The smiling neonatal nurse carefully placed both tiny babies directly into Lauren's waiting arms. Their little eyes fluttered open to look at the world for the very first time. She gently kissed their incredibly soft foreheads. Welcome home, she murmured tearfully. In that beautifully quiet, profound moment, completely surrounded by the steady, rhythmic hum of life-saving machines and the faint, clean smell of morning rain. Lauren Hayes, the woman who was once casually erased and publicly humiliated, finally, truly felt entirely whole again. Outside the hospital walls, exactly as the massive city woke up to a new day, Carter Reed's desperate press conference began to completely and spectacularly unravel in real time. Investigative reporters aggressively confronted him on live television with the hard, undeniable digital evidence that Naomi had strategically leaked to them just hours earlier, the highly forged luxury invoices, the completely falsified corporate expense claims, and Sloane's damning, accidental video confession. By noon that day, his massive company's stock completely plummeted into the ground. By that evening, the board would officially vote to suspend him permanently. And while his entire fake empire violently collapsed into dust, Lauren sat peacefully in her bed, holding the two incredibly tiny, perfect reasons why she absolutely no longer feared anything in this world. Not his wealth, not his power, and certainly not his name. The private hospital room smelled faintly of calming lavender and fresh, new beginnings. It had been exactly 3 exhausting, beautiful weeks since the twins' dramatic birth, and for the very first time in her life, Lauren felt she could truly breathe without a heavy weight of fear sitting on her chest. The loud, intimidating medical machines were finally gone. The constant beeping, monitors totally silent. 2 incredibly tiny, swaddled bundles slept peacefully in the bassinet right beside her bed, their small chests rising and falling in perfect, rhythmic sync. It was a beautiful, steady rhythm that firmly grounded her in a chaotic world she had once truly thought would never, ever stop violently spinning out of control. Gabriel sat comfortably in the corner armchair, his sleek laptop open on his knees, expertly navigating a highly important, muted corporate conference call. The ruthless, untouchable CEO of Sterling Capital, a man who was widely feared and respected on the cutthroat floors of Wall Street, now paused his multi-million-dollar negotiations to whisper softly between sudden baby coos. Lauren watched him intently from the bed, half smiling at the surreal Domestic. Sight. You know, you've essentially traded your high-yield stocks for changing. Diapers, she teased him incredibly softly. He quickly looked up from the screen, his gray eyes noticeably tired but radiating an immense, profound warmth. These specific investments actually have significantly better long-term returns for my soul, he said sincerely. She laughed very quietly, incredibly careful not to accidentally wake the sleeping twins. The joyful sound felt completely foreign in her own throat, exactly like a beautiful, forgotten language that was finally, slowly returning to her. Eleanor Sterling suddenly entered the quiet room, carrying an elegant silver tray laden with hot herbal tea and a thick, soft wool blanket. The twins are absolutely beautiful today, she said, her usually sharp, aristocratic voice softer and more maternal than Lauren had ever heard it. And you are recovering exceptionally well, my dear. Lauren nodded, accepting a warm cup. I honestly still get incredibly scared. Sometimes. This absolute silence. It feels too good. It feels temporary. Like something terrible is just waiting patiently around the next corner to ruin it. Eleanor meticulously poured the fragrant tea into delicate, hand-painted porcelain cups. True peace absolutely isn't fragile. Lauren, you are just finally learning how to comfortably live inside of it without waiting for a war. The peaceful days slowly blurred together into gentle, exhausting routines. Frantic feedings at 2 a.m. Soft, off-key lullabies sung at dawn. Long naps, filled with tiny, fluttering breaths, and bright morning sunlight streaking beautifully across the heavy linen curtains, hidden comfortably between those quiet moments. Lauren slowly found beautiful, lost slivers of her own soul she hadn't even consciously known were missing. When the babies finally slept, she would curl up contentedly on the plush couch, with her Kindle, highlighting passages in Atomic Habits while happily sipping hot, decaf coffee from a simple Starbucks cup that Gabriel faithfully brought to her each and every morning. Small steps, she whispered fiercely to herself, slowly turning each digital page. Small steps gradually rebuild big, beautiful lives. But entirely outside their impenetrable, warm bubble of calm, the ruthless corporate world continued to violently unravel for Carter Reed. Naomi arrived at the apartment one rainy afternoon with a massive stack of legal updates. She dropped her heavy, battered leather briefcase onto the granite counter and let out a long, exhausted sigh. He is officially under a massive, multi-agency federal investigation. They're looking into misappropriation of corporate funds, severely falsified expense reports, massive board ethics violations, literally the works. His board of directors officially voted unanimously to permanently suspend him, pending his criminal trial. Lauren's hand completely froze on the warm baby bottle she was holding. I honestly didn't ever want it to go that far. Naomi met her eyes with fierce, protective loyalty. You didn't push it that far, Lauren. The absolute truth did. Gabriel listened completely silently from his desk across the large room. When Naomi finally packed up and left, he walked slowly over to the couch and gently kissed Lauren's forehead. He arrogantly built his entire empire on a foundation of manipulation and lies. Sooner or later, gravity always does its job and pulls it down. That quiet night, long after the twins drifted into a deep sleep, Lauren sat, scrolling through her hidden message requests on social media. Dozens of women from all over the world had written long, emotional letters to her, complete. Strangers who clearly, painfully saw themselves reflected in her highly publicized story. You actually made me finally believe that healing from his abuse is possible. Thank you so much for bravely standing tall when he tried to break you. Her pale fingers physically trembled as she slowly typed back a single, powerful line to them. You absolutely don't have to be completely unbroken to be incredibly strong. The very next morning, Gabriel surprised her with something entirely new. A small, beautiful, handcrafted leather journal heavily embossed with her own initials in gold. This is for your thoughts, he said softly, handing her a pen. Or, perhaps, for writing your next great chapter. She opened the heavy cover to the very first, pristine blank page. The crisp smell of fresh, expensive paper was incredibly comforting. Very slowly, she began to write in cursive. The exact day I finally stopped desperately waiting for someone else to save me was the exact day my real life finally began. Eleanor peeked quietly in from the hallway, smiling a small, proud, knowing smile. You look exactly like a powerful woman who is finally ready to return to the world. Lauren looked up from the page, her eyes clear. Maybe I am. But this specific time, I will only enter it entirely on my own terms. Outside the massive window, the iconic Manhattan skyline glowed a brilliant, triumphant gold under the rising morning sun. Somewhere deep downtown, trashy tabloids and financial headlines still screamed loudly about a billionaire's corporate downfall and an epic betrayal. But right here, inside this incredibly quiet, safe apartment completely filled with innocent baby laughter and rising tea steam, an entirely different, beautiful story was actively being written. Lauren placed her silver pen gently down on the desk and whispered softly to the sleeping twins. We're completely safe now. That is absolutely all that matters. And for the very first time since that horrific, humiliating night at the plaza, her profound peace absolutely didn't feel temporarily borrowed. It felt entirely, permanently earned. Heavy rain violently streaked the massive office windows of Naomi Brooks's elite law firm, drawing crooked, shimmering silver lines down the dark glass. It was incredibly late, pushing almost midnight, and her expansive mahogany desk was completely buried beneath towering stacks of thick folders stamped with red, confidential ink. Lauren sat exhaustedly across from her, one of the tiny twins fast asleep against her chest in a carrier, the other resting peacefully in a portable bassinet securely beside her chair. The absolute only light in the dark room came from the glowing screen of Naomi's MacBook and a single, low-wattage desk lamp that was throwing incredibly long, dramatic shadows across their tired faces. Naomi leaned heavily back in her leather chair, aggressively rubbing her pounding temples. There is absolutely someone highly placed inside Reed Technologies who desperately wants to talk to us, she said incredibly quietly, lowering her voice. They reached out to my firm today through a highly encrypted, untraceable email. This person claims they possess hard, undeniable digital evidence that Carter actively used company funds for massive personal gain. More evidence than we already know about. Lauren frowned deeply, adjusting the sleeping baby's blanket. Why would they only come forward now? Because they are absolutely terrified, Naomi replied grimly. They've seen exactly how ruthlessly he treats people who dare to cross him. But they are apparently ready to come forward and blow the whistle if we can absolutely guarantee them federal protection. Gabriel suddenly entered the dim office, his heavy wool coat still visibly damp from the raging storm outside. He wordlessly handed Naomi a small, black USB drive. This package just came through to my security team's anonymous tip line, he said, his voice grave. It contains raw payroll spreadsheets, massive offshore bank transfers, and high-resolution photos of receipts, all perfectly matching the timeline of the Beverly Hills spending spree. Naomi's eyes widened in sheer shock as she plugged the drive into her laptop. This is the exact same hidden financial trail I was desperately trying to follow. Whoever anonymously sent this to us, they are literally risking their entire life and career. Lauren gently rocked the sleeping baby against her chest. Then we absolutely must protect them, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. Nobody on earth should ever lose their life just for bravely telling the truth. Gabriel studied her beautiful face intently in the dim light, even buried under the crushing weight of sheer exhaustion and new motherhood. Her soft voice carried a profound, undeniable calm authority. You've truly changed, he said incredibly softly, all evident in his tone. She smiled a very faint, knowing smile. Maybe I just finally stopped apologizing to the world for surviving. The very next day, Naomi carefully arranged a highly secure, offline meeting at an old, crowded diner deep in Brooklyn. Neutral, unmonitored ground, she had insisted. The brave whistleblower turned out to be a very young, terrified woman named Emily Torres. She had been Carter's former lead accounting assistant. Her pale hands shook so violently that her coffee spilled as she nervously stirred it. I meticulously kept hidden digital copies of absolutely everything he made me do, she whispered, constantly looking over her shoulder at the diner door. I honestly couldn't stand to watch him violently destroy innocent people's lives anymore. Lauren leaned forward across the sticky table, her eyes full of empathy. What exactly made you finally decide to risk everything and come forward now? Emily? Emily's wide, Terrified eyes instantly filled with hot tears. When I saw that horrible paparazzi picture of you standing alone crying at the plaza, you looked so incredibly broken. And I finally, truly realized that he maliciously breaks absolutely everyone he can't fully control. Naomi quietly placed a small digital recorder on the table between them. I have already spoken to the U.S. Attorney. You will be placed immediately under strict federal whistleblower protection. Once this massive story goes public, Carter's people legally can't touch you. Emily nodded weakly, wiping her eyes, and slowly slid a small, heavily sealed manila folder across the table. Inside were original, verified bank records, clearly showing Carter's unmistakable digital signature authorizing massive six-figure payments directly to Sloan Vega, fraudulently labeled as marketing and research. Gabriel rapidly scanned the documents, his eyes narrowing. This is exactly it, he said, tapping the paper. This is the smoking gun that permanently buries him. Emily hesitated, her voice cracking with fear. Just please promise me he won't be able to find me. Lauren immediately reached across the table, covering the younger woman's trembling, cold hand with her own. He won't ever find you. Not while we are still standing. Later that same evening, back in the absolute safety of the high-rise apartment, Lauren sat quietly by the large window with both babies sleeping soundly in their cribs beside her. The sprawling city glowed brilliantly in the distance, a chaotic, beautiful mix of noise and light. She thought deeply of Emily, of the profound, raw fear shining in the girl's eyes, and suddenly realized something incredibly powerful. Carter hadn't just arrogantly taken things from her. In his relentless, blind greed, he had accidentally, meticulously created an entire, massive army of victimized people who were now more than ready to watch him fall. Naomi's triumphant voice came through loudly on the speakerphone. I just officially filed the preliminary legal motion. Once the SEC formally receives these documents tomorrow, they will be legally forced to open a massive federal investigation within 72 hours. By then, the entire ugly story will be permanent public record. Gabriel's intense gaze met Lauren's across the quiet room. This is the absolute point of no return for us. After we do this, his entire empire violently burns to the ground. Lauren nodded slowly, her expression resolute. Then let it burn. But we make absolutely sure no one else gets hurt in the fire. She turned back toward the glowing skyline, intently watching the faint reflection of her own face in the heavy glass. She looked significantly stronger, infinitely older, and profoundly calmer than she ever had before. She whispered to the glass, "We are absolutely not victims anymore." One of the twins stirred softly in their sleep, reaching out a tiny, grasping hand, almost exactly as if they were sensing the gravity of her words. In that incredibly quiet, sacred moment, The violent storm raging outside the window finally faded into a soft, harmless drizzle. Somewhere far across the vast expanse of Manhattan, Carter Reed slept incredibly, soundly in his luxury penthouse, completely, blissfully unaware that by the time the sun rose, the very first, devastating headline of his spectacular downfall had already been drafted. And in the soft, warm glow of that midnight window, Lauren Hayes finally realized that true justice absolutely doesn't always roar like a lion. Sometimes, it merely whispers quietly in the dark right before it lethally strikes. The massive, glass-walled conference room of Reed Technologies glittered blindingly beneath the bright morning sun, perched arrogantly high above Park Avenue, exactly like an impenetrable fortress of wealth and ego. 12 elite, highly respected board members sat in absolute, tense silence, their eyes fixed unblinkingly on the frantic man aggressively pacing at the head of the long mahogany table. Carter Reed's custom designer suit was still physically immaculate, but his carefully cultivated, icy composure was rapidly and violently slipping away. Heavy beads of nervous sweat gathered noticeably at his crisp collar. Outside the window, the sprawling Manhattan skyline reflected mockingly in the glass, a stark, towering reminder of absolutely everything he had once entirely owned and controlled. "Let me be incredibly clear with all of you," Carter said, his voice sharp and laced with desperate panic. "This so-called federal investigation is nothing but a malicious, coordinated smear campaign. Gabriel Sterling is entirely behind it. He desperately wants a hostile takeover of my company, and he is ruthlessly using my unstable ex-wife as pathetic public bait to get it." Uneasy, shocked murmurs rippled quickly across the heavy table. The chairman of the board, an intimidating, silver-haired older man named Harlan, slowly raised a skeptical brow. "We have just received an official, legal notice of audit from the SEC. Carter, they absolutely do not investigate petty tabloid rumors. They are investigating your personal, corporate expense accounts." Carter's eyes darkened with pure, unadulterated fury. "Those leaked invoices are heavily doctored fakes." "Are they?" Harlan asked coldly, deliberately sliding a thick, red folder across the polished table. Inside were pristine copies of the exact same damning documents Naomi and Lauren had painstakingly uncovered. There was undeniable proof of millions in company funds illegally funneled into luxury Beverly Hills hotels, exorbitant Cartier jewelry purchases, and fake marketing consultations, all filed directly under Sloan Vega's name. Carter's jaw tightened so hard his teeth audibly ground together. "This is illegal digital manipulation. Sterling obviously planted that fake data in our servers." At that exact, cinematic moment, the heavy oak boardroom door smoothly opened. The entire room turned to look. Gabriel Sterling stepped confidently into the room. He looked incredibly calm, his suit crisp, his entire demeanor as silent and lethal as freezing winter air. He absolutely wasn't standing there as a minority investor today. He was there, as an executing witness. "Good morning, gentlemen," Gabriel said evenly, his voice commanding the space. "I was officially invited here by the board to clarify a few important things." Carter sneered, his face turning a mottled red. "Clarify? You're the absolute bastard who has been illegally orchestrating this entire pathetic circus." Gabriel calmly set his sleek leather briefcase on the table and snapped it open. Clarification is actually incredibly easy to provide when you possess absolute, undeniable proof. He slowly slid a single, small silver flash drive directly toward Harlan. "Here is a complete, unedited digital log of absolutely all corporate financial transactions for the last 2 years, securely downloaded directly from Reed Technology's own internal servers. It explicitly includes every single digital timestamp, tracked IP addresses, and highly secure authorization codes. All of them legally and digitally signed off by you, Carter." The massive room fell into a horrifying, dead silence. The tiny, mechanical sound of the flash drive clicking into Harlan's laptop echoed loudly through the room, exactly like a judge's final gavel. The large projector screen lit up brightly. Spreadsheet after complex spreadsheet of staggering, illegal numbers flashed for everyone to see. The digital evidence was completely, legally undeniable. One furious board member leaned aggressively forward in his chair. "These massive transactions, Carter, this absolutely isn't an overspend on PR. Marketing. This is blatant federal corporate theft." Carter violently slammed his open palm against the table, rattling the coffee cups. "You actually think a jealous rival's illegal data dump proves anything in a court of law?" Gabriel didn't even blink. "No. But Emily Torres is sworn, legally signed federal affidavit absolutely does." A shocked, collective murmur violently swept through the room. "Who on earth is Emily Torres?" a confused board member asked aloud. "Your former lead accounting assistant," Gabriel replied smoothly, his eyes locked on Carter. "The exact same young woman you violently threatened to fire and ruin if she ever dared to question your fraudulent numbers. She is now officially sitting under heavily armed federal whistleblower protection." Carter completely froze. For the very first time in his entire arrogant life, his flawless, sociopathic mask visibly cracked into a million pieces. She's lying to them." Gabriel leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table, his voice dropping, incredibly low and terrifyingly steady. "You arrogantly built your entire, glittering empire on toxic lies, Carter. But the ultimate, fatal flaw about building on lies is that they absolutely do not scale." Across the table, Harlan slowly adjusted his glasses, his face a mask of pure disgust. "We will hold an emergency vote right now," he said firmly. "Effective immediately. Carter Reed is permanently suspended as CEO, pending a full federal criminal investigation. All physical and digital company access is revoked as of this exact second." Carter's arrogant face went sickeningly pale. "You absolutely cannot do this to Me. This is my company. I built this. Harlan looked at him with absolute, freezing contempt. It was your company. Now, it is legally the property of the innocent shareholders you so callously defrauded. Two massive, armed corporate security guards standing by the door stepped aggressively forward, ready to physically remove him. Carter stood completely frozen, sheer fury and utter disbelief violently warring in his bloodshot eyes. You actually think this pathetic stunt ends me? He snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Gabriel. I will personally sue every single one of you in this room into bankruptcy. Gabriel met his furious, pathetic glare with absolute, unshakable calm. You can certainly try to do that, Carter. But first, you'll have to survive facing the absolute truth you spent your entire life running away from. As a screaming, furious Carter was forcefully escorted out of the boardroom by security, the entire room collectively exhaled a massive sigh of relief. The sprawling city of Manhattan stretched out beautifully beyond the windows, brilliant, bustling, and completely indifferent to the fall of a tyrant. Later that same day, Gabriel texted Lauren one single, incredibly powerful line. It is officially done. He is completely out. Lauren read the glowing message on her phone while standing quietly in the nursery, her beautiful twins fast asleep in their cribs beside her. She closed her tired eyes, hot tears falling silently and freely down her cheeks. For agonizing months, she had desperately, endlessly dreamed of achieving this justice. But now that it had finally arrived, she surprisingly didn't feel loud, triumphant vindication. She just felt an overwhelming, profound sense of release. And high above the busy streets of Park Avenue, the arrogant, cruel man who had once ruthlessly controlled her entire fate walked out of the doors of his own massive empire for the absolute last time. He was finally completely powerless. And he was finally, truly seen for the monster he was. The brilliant, blinding sun rose high over Beverly Hills, completely washing Sloan Vega's massive, rented mansion in a warm, golden light that tragically couldn't even begin to reach her cold heart. She stood absolutely frozen before an oversized vanity mirror, completely surrounded by dozens of untouched, expensive makeup brushes and half-empty bottles of designer perfume. Her pale, exhausted reflection stared back at her. Like a complete stranger she simply no longer recognized. The sprawling villa was dead quiet, entirely too quiet for someone who had once aggressively lived her entire life feeding off constant internet noise, flashing paparazzi cameras, and fake online applause. Her cell phone absolutely wouldn't stop violently buzzing on the marble counter. Angry corporate sponsors, panicked talent agents, and relentless tabloid journalists were all desperately demanding official statements that she honestly didn't have the courage or the words to give them. She frantically scrolled through her curated social media feed, helplessly watching her carefully constructed fake empire violently crumble into dust in real time. The hashtag Sloan Speaks Too Much still trended globally at #1. But now it carried a vicious, highly toxic venom that she absolutely couldn't PR spin her way out of. Thousands of hateful, brutal comments flooded rapidly beneath every single one of her old, heavily filtered posts. Disgusting homewrecker, pathological liar, pathetic gold digger. The massive luxury brands she'd so proudly flaunted online for months, Cartier, Dior, and even a new, organic skincare line she had just recently helped launch, had all brutally and publicly terminated their million-dollar contracts with her overnight. The exact same glossy, heavily photoshopped photos that had once made her millions of dollars now served only to explicitly mark the humiliating, public trail of her spectacular downfall. Her frantic manager, Derek, violently stormed into the bedroom holding a glowing tablet in one hand and an espresso in the other. The mainstream press is aggressively demanding a direct quote from you today. If you completely refuse to respond, you'll look incredibly guilty to the public. Sloane's voice was completely flat and devoid of emotion. I am incredibly guilty, Derek. He froze in his tracks, staring at her in shock. Then we aggressively fake remorse. We do the classic redemption arc tour. You cry on camera during an exclusive interview. You talk about deep personal growth and going to therapy. The stupid public absolutely loves a good comeback story. She slowly shook her head, staring blankly at the wall. Absolutely no one ever forgives the cruel woman who knowingly and maliciously replaces a pregnant wife. Derek sighed heavily, rubbing his temples in sheer frustration. Then at the very least, issue a formal, written apology online. Try to control the massive damage. But Sloane wasn't even listening to him anymore. She stared numbly at a heavy, silver-framed photo resting on her vanity. It was a picture of her and Carter from their very first joint corporate campaign. He was looking handsome in a crisp, white dress shirt. She was dripping in borrowed diamond earrings. They were both smiling brightly, both expertly pretending it was an epic, sweeping romance. Her empty stomach churned violently with pure nausea. He confidently promised me we'd be completely unstoppable, she whispered to the empty room. He promised me I'd never, ever have to look over my shoulder or worry about money ever again. Now, absolutely all she had left was deafening silence, massive legal bills, and the crushing, unbearable weight of his broken, toxic promises. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Manhattan, Naomi and Gabriel sat quietly in his sprawling office, intently watching the massive media fallout unfold on multiple screens. Her official PR statement is coming any minute now, Naomi said, scrolling rapidly through Twitter on her iPad. Her entire management team is in a total blind panic. Lauren sat comfortably on the plush couch beside them. She was incredibly calm, though somewhat distant, gently rocking one of the sleeping twins in her warm arms. I honestly don't hate her, she said incredibly quietly. Surprising them. Both. I actually just deeply pity her. She foolishly traded her entire soul for a flashy, temporary headline. And now that headline has completely expired. Gabriel nodded slowly in agreement. Carter always callously built people up. Exactly like they were disposable corporate brands. The minute they stop successfully selling for him, he immediately discards them in the trash. Back on the sunny West Coast, Sloane's phone suddenly buzzed aggressively again. This time, it was an incoming call from Carter. She stared blankly at his name glowing brightly on the cracked screen. For a very long, pathetic moment, she actually almost answered it out of pure habit. Then, her thumb moved, and she forcefully pressed decline. A split second later, an angry text message popped up. You legally owe me your absolute loyalty. Don't you dare speak to the press today. Her shaking fingers hovered nervously over the digital keyboard for a long time. Then, she quickly typed, You ruthlessly used me. And now, we are both paying the ultimate price for it. She hit send, and then violently hurled the expensive phone entirely across the massive bedroom. The terrifying sound of the screen shattering into a million pieces echoed loudly through the massive, empty, lonely house. Moments later, Derek returned to the room, completely breathless and panicked. CNN just released breaking news. The SEC officially froze all of Reed Technologies' corporate assets. Carter is under massive federal criminal investigation. It's completely over for him. Sloane slowly sank down into the plush velvet couch, her eyes entirely vacant and dead. No, she whispered softly to herself. It's only finally just beginning. That late afternoon, she sat down and recorded a raw video and posted it online. There were absolutely no smoothing filters used. There was no expensive ring, lighting. There was no fake Hollywood glamour. It was just her, sitting on the floor in a baggy, gray sweatshirt, completely barefaced and exhausted. I owe the world a massive apology, she said directly into the camera lens. Her voice shaking. Not for foolishly falling in love with a liar, but for actively, maliciously helping a cruel man destroy an innocent woman's entire life. I honestly thought I was winning some kind of game. In reality, I was just another disposable, pathetic prop in his sick, twisted performance. The raw video immediately went globally viral. But it didn't explode with hateful comments this time. It was met with an eerie, profound silence. People absolutely didn't cheer her sad confession. They simply pitied and mourned her profound emptiness. In Manhattan, Lauren watched the viral clip on her phone and exhaled softly. Maybe that was her very first, truly honest moment in years, she murmured. Gabriel looked over at her from his desk. And with that, your absolute last remaining tie to that toxic past just disappeared completely. Lauren smiled a very faint, genuine smile, holding her sleeping baby slightly closer to her chest. Good. I am completely, permanently done living as a side character in someone else's tragic story. As dusk finally settled heavily over Beverly Hills, painting the sky in deep purples, Sloane turned off her new phone for the very first time in years. She walked slowly outside onto the cool terrace barefoot, the sky glowing a fiery orange, the evening air incredibly heavy with profound regret. And for the very first time in her adult life, she quietly faced a beautiful sunset entirely without a camera in her hand, just a broken, lonely woman, watching her fake empire of lies finally fade to pitch black. The towering federal courthouse on Center Street was absolutely packed to the brim. The stale air inside the massive building was incredibly thick with palpable tension and the relentless, blinding flash of press photography. Dozens of aggressive reporters tightly lined the grand marble steps, desperately shouting invasive questions that bounced loudly off the cold, ancient stone walls. Lauren, are you officially testifying against him today? Do you honestly still harbor any romantic feelings for your ex-husband? Is it actually true that the billionaire Sterling family secretly funded your entire legal team? Lauren kept her sharp gaze aimed dead forward, completely ignoring the noise. Her posture was incredibly steady and commanding. She was dressed impeccably in a highly tailored, severe navy blue suit that Naomi had aggressively insisted she wear. She looked exactly like the incredibly powerful, intelligent version of herself that Carter had tried so desperately to erase and belittle. She was strong. She was centered. She was completely untouchable. Gabriel walked closely beside her, acting as a quiet, impenetrable wall of calm protection in a sharp gray overcoat. Inside the building, the loud buzz of scandalous whispers eagerly followed them. Down the long, polished corridor exactly like a gathering storm, Naomi met them, directly outside the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. Thick legal files were securely tucked under her arm, and her voice was incredibly low but fierce. He is walking in there today with a massive, high-priced, full defense team. Fully expect them to play incredibly dirty on the stand. Lauren simply nodded, her expression stoic. Playing dirty is absolutely all he knows how to do. Inside, the massive courtroom hummed with a restrained, electric chaos. Carter Reed sat stiffly at the defendant's table. His hair was perfectly styled. His suit was crisp and expensive, but he was completely unable to hide the bone-deep, terrified exhaustion permanently etched into his pale face. The smug, untouchable arrogance that had once so effortlessly carried him through elite boardrooms was entirely gone. His panicked lawyers flanked him closely, frantically flipping through massive, disorganized binders filled with weak, fabricated excuses. When the federal judge finally entered the room, the entire gallery scrambled to stunt. Cameras clicked frantically. Carter aggressively avoided making any eye contact with Lauren. Case number 2406, the court clerk read aloud, his voice echoing. Reed Technologies versus Carter J. Reed. Massive civil and corporate financial misconduct. Lauren's palms sweated slightly against her skirt, but her resolve absolutely didn't falter. She took the witness stand confidently when called, her heart pounding a steady rhythm as she placed a firm hand on the Bible. "Do you solemnly swear to tell the absolute truth?" "I do." Naomi approached the podium and began incredibly gently. "Miss Hayes, could you please tell the court exactly how your personal name became fraudulently connected to Mr. Reed's massive company funds?" Lauren's voice rang out, crystal clear and incredibly steady. "I absolutely didn't take anything from that company. I faithfully built everything right beside him for years. I built his pitch presentations. I coordinated his investor meetings. I managed his PR strategies. I simply didn't know he was secretly using that exact same company money to illegally pay for his extravagant affair." Shocked murmurs rippled violently through the packed courtroom gallery. Naomi confidently displayed large, blown-up copies of the luxury invoices on the projector, each one clearly stamped with Carter's unique digital signature. "Did Mr. Reed ever once deny to you that he authorized these exorbitant payments?" Lauren looked directly at her sweating ex-husband. "Not to me. He simply lied and said they were necessary. Standard operating costs for the brand's image." Carter's lead lawyer instantly jumped up and objected, but the judge quickly and sternly overruled it. Naomi continued, her tone softening. "And what exactly did you personally lose as a direct result of these malicious actions?" Lauren took a very slow, deep, calming breath. "I lost my family home. I lost my public dignity. I lost my entire faith in people. But I also gained something incredibly valuable, too. I gained the profound understanding that remaining silent only ever protects the wrong side." Even the strict, unyielding judge seemed to pause for a moment at the raw, honest power of her words. When Carter's desperate turn finally came to take the stand, he tried to straighten his posture, smirking faintly to project fake confidence. "I absolutely never misused a single dime of corporate funds. I was aggressively expanding the company's global marketing reach." The vindictive woman sitting right there, he nodded mockingly toward Lauren, has a very long, documented history of violently dramatizing things just for public attention. She's simply angry because I fell out of love and moved on. Loud gasps of disgust echoed loudly through the courtroom at his sheer audacity. Naomi's tone instantly turned razor-sharp and lethal. "Mr. Reed, are these exactly your verified digital initials listed on Exhibit B?" He hesitated, sweating profusely. "Yes, but..." "And this massive, untraceable bank transfer for $48,000. Vaguely labeled brand collaboration. That paid for a private charter jet to Los Angeles, where you and Miss Vega were widely photographed by paparazzi the very next day. Is that just purely coincidental?" Carter's fake composure finally cracked into pieces. "You are completely maliciously twisting things to ruin me. We are simply uncovering them. Mr. Reed, Naomi replied incredibly coolly, turning her back to him. The judge banged the heavy wooden gavel loudly. Enough! The hard financial evidence speaks clearly for itself. As the grueling session finally ended and court was adjourned, Carter aggressively turned toward Lauren as he passed her table, his voice dropping to a toxic, low hiss. Enjoy the little media show while it lasts. Lauren. It absolutely won't last. She met his furious, terrified glare with absolute, unbreakable calm resolve. Neither did your pathetic lies, Carter. Outside on the courthouse steps, the freezing wind carried the chaotic sound of hundreds of reporters loudly shouting her name. But Lauren absolutely didn't flinch or hide. Gabriel waited patiently for her by the bottom of the steps, his secure phone clutched in his hand. The judge's official guilty recommendation will hit the mainstream press within the hour, he said incredibly quietly, a proud smile forming. You actually did it. Lauren smiled, a very faint, tired smile. No, Gabriel. We did it. Naomi quickly joined them, triumphantly slipping her dark designer sunglasses on. Her face. His team will probably try to frantically appeal the ruling, she said dismissively. Lauren looked up at the vast, gray Manhattan sky, feeling entirely free. He can desperately keep fighting all he wants. But this time around, he is fighting the absolute truth. And the truth always wins. As they walked confidently away from the courthouse, the massive sea of cameras aggressively followed them. But for the very first time, the camera lens was telling an entirely different story. The fragile woman who was once utterly humiliated in the tabloid headlines was now the incredibly powerful, triumphant headline itself. She was living, breathing proof that even in a dark, toxic world fueled entirely by power and deceit, absolute integrity could still gracefully win the war. The massive, opulent gala ballroom at the Manhattan Ritz-Carlton glowed vibrantly like a sea of molten gold. Dozens of enormous, dripping crystal chandeliers threw dazzling, fractured reflections across the flawlessly polished marble floors. A string quartet of violins hummed softly and elegantly in the corner, and the absolute elite of the city had gathered under one magnificent roof. Top corporate executives, wealthy philanthropists, and familiar, powerful faces from the front pages of the business section mingled effortlessly. It was the highly anticipated annual New York Healthcare Foundation dinner. It was the exact same prestigious event Lauren had once attended several years ago. As nothing more than Carter's quiet, submissive, silent accessory. Tonight, however, she was returning to the room under an entirely different name, and with entirely different power. Lauren Hayes Sterling. She stood confidently near the grand entrance, clutching a modest, elegant evening bag. The stunning, simple black gown that Eleanor had personally chosen. For her fit her body perfectly, looking exactly like quiet, impenetrable armor. Gabriel stood beside her, adjusting his tailored tuxedo cuffs, his gray eyes absolutely full of immense, overflowing pride. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly, leaning in close. Lauren inhaled a deep, steadying breath. "I'm honestly not sure anyone is ever truly ready to face all their old ghosts in the exact same room." He smiled a warm, grounding smile. "Then we walk in and face them anyway." Eleanor Sterling approached them from the coat check, looking undeniably regal and elegant in a sweeping silver dress, gracefully offering Lauren her arm. The exact moment you walk confidently through those heavy doors, you completely stop being what they cruelly said you were in the tabloids. You officially start being exactly what you became in the fire. The heavy brass doors opened wide. The shocked murmurs began almost instantly. Hundreds of heads turned sharply. Hushed, scandalous whispers rippled rapidly through the glittering crowd, some in absolute awe, some in sheer disbelief. "Is that really her? The disgraced ex-wife? My God! She looks absolutely radiant." Lauren smiled politely and genuinely as dozens of sudden camera flashes caught her glowing face. For the very first time in her life, the intense public attention didn't burn or terrify her. It illuminated her. She was absolutely no longer someone else's pathetic, tragic scandal. She was her own, powerful, triumphant story. The glittering evening unfolded flawlessly with expensive champagne toasts, genuine laughter, and the soft, polite clinking of crystal glasses. Lauren took her prominent seat at a VIP table located directly near the main stage, sitting directly across from top hospital executives and wealthy charity directors. Her brand new organization, the Hayes Maternal Foundation, funded heavily and partly by the Sterling family wealth, was being officially recognized that night for its groundbreaking grassroots maternal health initiatives. When her name was finally announced over the speakers, the resulting applause was incredibly warm, loud, and entirely genuine. She rose gracefully from her chair, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in her chest, but her physical posture remaining perfectly steady. Naomi, seated proudly at a nearby table, enthusiastically mouthed, "Go get them." Lauren stepped confidently onto the brightly lit stage, adjusting the microphone, catching her breath for just a second before she began to speak. "I used to foolishly think that true strength meant maintaining absolute silence," she began, her clear voice echoing perfectly through the massive, quiet hall. "I thought that true dignity simply meant enduring terrible things quietly, even when the entire world routinely mistook a man's cruelty for confidence." She paused, looking out over the sea of wealthy faces. "But I learned the hard way that silence absolutely does not protect you. It only imprisons you. Tonight, I stand before you not because I am completely fearless, but because I am finally, truly free." A profound, Respectful hush fell over the entire crowd. She continued, her voice incredibly calm, yet undeniably fierce. There was a very dark time in my life when I was cruelly told that impending motherhood made me a corporate liability. I was told that basic human compassion had absolutely no place in the world of high ambition. But I am here to tell you that compassion, real, actionable compassion, is the ultimate power. It miraculously builds up exactly what blind, selfish greed violently destroys. She paused again, letting the heavy, profound words settle deeply into the room. Cameras flashed rapidly from the press pit. But for once, she didn't mind the blinding light. This new foundation isn't just about providing basic health care. It is about actively giving broken women a real chance to rebuild their lives. It is about helping them stand up tall again when the entire world desperately tries to silence them. When she finally finished speaking, the massive elite audience rose to their feet in a thunderous, spontaneous standing ovation. Gabriel's strong hands were the very first to clap loudly. Eleanor's sharp eyes actually glistened with unshed tears of pride. Even Naomi, ever the composed, cynical lawyer, openly wiped away a stray tear from her cheek. As Lauren gracefully left the stage, a young woman nervously approached her in the aisle. She was a young journalist holding a notepad with violently trembling hands. "Miss Sterling," she said incredibly softly, her voice shaking. "I actually used to intern at Reed Technologies. I saw firsthand exactly what they did to you in that office. Thank you so much for bravely surviving out loud." Lauren smiled a very gentle, understanding smile and touched the girl's arm. "That is the absolute only kind of surviving worth doing." Across the massive room, several of Carter's former wealthy investors sat incredibly quietly at their tables, intently watching her. A few of them even stood and clapped, very awkwardly at first, and then with sincere, profound respect. Her public reputation had completely, permanently shifted. The global narrative was absolutely no longer Carter's to control. Later that magical night, Gabriel finally found her standing alone on the cold stone balcony, looking out over the dark expanse of Central Park. The massive, glittering city glimmered beautifully below them, exactly like 1,000 untold stories waiting to happen. He gently draped his warm tuxedo jacket over her bare shoulders. "You were absolutely magnificent up there," he whispered, kissing her temple. Lauren laughed softly, leaning back against his chest. "I was absolutely terrified the entire time." "That's exactly what made it so real," he said warmly. "You didn't just perform for them. You lived it." She turned around to face him, her dark eyes perfectly reflecting the sparkling city lights. "Do you actually think this is it? Is this the grand ending?" He smiled and slowly shook his head. "No. It's the grand beginning. And it's written entirely in your own handwriting." Far below them, the muffled, joyous sound of applause still echoed faintly through the ballroom. and for the very first time, the strong woman who was once utterly humiliated and broken beneath those very same chandeliers stood high. Above them as her own, brilliant light, infinitely brighter, vastly stronger, and completely untouchable. The sprawling city had finally quieted down into the profound, heavy hush that only ever came long after midnight. Freezing rain misted softly over the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the sterling penthouse, completely blurring the towering Manhattan skyline into a beautiful, abstract watercolor painting of glowing gold and dark gray. Inside the warm apartment, the twins were finally fast asleep, their incredibly soft, rhythmic breathing filling the quiet nursery down the hall. Lauren sat comfortably curled up on the plush living room couch, wearing one of Gabriel's oversized, soft cashmere sweaters, peacefully sipping hot chamomile tea from a delicate white porcelain cup. For once in her chaotic life, her entire world felt perfectly, wonderfully still. Then, the cell phone sitting on the coffee table violently rang. The harsh, unexpected electronic sound pierced aggressively right through the calm of the room. The intense vibration rattled against the solid marble counter, trembling exactly like a dire, physical warning. She hesitated, then slowly leaned forward and glanced at the glowing screen. Unknown number. Normally, she would have instantly ignored it and let it go to voicemail. But something deep and unexplainable in her chest told her she needed to answer it. She swiped the screen. Hello. For a few agonizing seconds, there was absolutely nothing but dead silence on the line. Then, a highly familiar voice she hadn't heard in agonizing months spoke up. It was incredibly hoarse. It sounded completely broken and bone-tired. Lauren. It's me. It's Carter. Her hand instantly went ice-cold around the warm porcelain cup. What exactly do you want, Carter? He let out a very weak, incredibly bitter laugh that devolved into a wet cough. You actually sound so different. You sound stronger. I guess the pampered billionaire lifestyle really suits you. She didn't dignify that with a reply. In the background of the call, she could clearly hear muffled, chaotic noise. Was he at a dive bar? No. It sounded incredibly hollow, like an empty, echoing apartment. She heard the distinct, sad sound of glass bottles clinking together. It was the undeniable sound of total, utter defeat. I thought I'd call you, he said, his slurred tone highly uneven and desperate. Absolutely everything is completely gone. Lauren. The federal board froze all of my remaining assets. The furious investors literally want my head. On a spike. Sloan completely left me and emptied the accounts. This massive house is entirely empty. I don't even legally have my own good name anymore. Lauren simply stared blankly out at the glittering city lights, her heart remaining perfectly steady and entirely unbothered. That is absolutely not my problem anymore. I know it isn't, he said incredibly softly, his voice cracking. But it used to be. You used to actually care about me. She swallowed hard, fighting back any lingering ghosts of the past. I deeply cared about you right up until the exact moment you made caring about people look like a pathetic weakness. There was a very long, heavy pause on the line. You actually think I don't regret it? He asked, his voice breaking into a sob. You think I actively planned for my entire life to end up like this? I honestly didn't know how to stop needing to win at all costs. Her voice was incredibly quiet, almost maternal, and surprisingly kind. You didn't need to constantly win, Carter. You just needed to be a decent human being. He laughed again, incredibly bitterly this time. Maybe. But being decent absolutely doesn't build billion-dollar empires. And blind greed obviously doesn't keep them, she said firmly. The freezing rain thickened aggressively outside the window, streaking rapidly down the heavy glass exactly like the tears she absolutely refused to shed for him ever again. Carter's voice suddenly softened, sounding almost remarkably human for the first time in years. I watched the footage of the gala on TV tonight. You looked incredibly happy. I am. He hesitated, the silence stretching. Do they? Do your kids look anything like me? Lauren closed her eyes, taking a deep, cleansing breath. They look exactly like themselves, Carter. That's absolutely all that matters. Another incredibly long, agonizing silence stretched between them over the phone line. Then, completely unexpectedly, his arrogant voice broke down entirely into quiet weeping. I honestly don't even know who I am anymore without all the money and the power. Maybe that is exactly the point, she said softly. Now, you finally get to find out. I absolutely don't deserve that kind of second chance. No, she said incredibly gently. You probably don't. But you can absolutely still choose to take it. For the very first time in his entire life, he didn't argue with her. He didn't try to spin the narrative or manipulate the facts. He just breathed into the receiver, slow, ragged, and highly uneven. I am so incredibly sorry, Lauren, for absolutely everything. You truly didn't deserve what I maliciously did to you. Her throat tightened slightly with emotion, but her words stayed perfectly calm and resolute. You're absolutely right. I didn't. But if you're calling me tonight looking for my ultimate forgiveness, you will have to do the hard work to earn that yourself. She heard him exhale heavily into the phone, a long, shuddering sound that carried both immense, crushing pain and total, final surrender. Goodbye, Lauren. Goodbye, Carter. The line went completely dead with a click. Lauren slowly set the phone down face down on the coffee table. Her hands were trembling very slightly, but absolutely not from anger or fear this time. It was from pure Unadulterated release. She had unconsciously waited agonizing months for this exact, validating moment, and now that it had finally arrived, she surprisingly didn't feel a shred of petty triumph or toxic bitterness. She only felt profound, absolute peace. Gabriel suddenly appeared quietly in the dark doorway, looking sleepy-eyed and comfortable in just a soft t-shirt and sweatpants. Is everything okay out here? She nodded slowly, wiping a single, stray tear from her eye. Yeah, it was. Just final closure. He walked over and sat down closely beside her, pulling her warmly and protectively into his strong arms. You absolutely don't owe the past anything, Lauren. I know I don't, she whispered, resting her tired head comfortably against his broad chest. But sometimes, you still just have to formally say goodbye to it. To move on. Outside the window, the heavy rain finally slowed to a mist, and the early dawn began to beautifully tint the dark clouds a faint, hopeful pink. Lauren watched the morning light slowly shift and expand across the iconic skyline, physically feeling the absolute final, frayed thread of her traumatic old life unravel, quietly and painlessly into nothing. And somewhere far across the sprawling country, a broken man who had once possessed absolutely everything finally, painfully understood what it truly meant to have absolutely nothing, while the strong woman he had callously tried to break had finally learned exactly what it meant to have more than enough. Los Angeles glimmered mercilessly under a brutal, unforgiving afternoon sun. The sprawling, superficial city that had once practically worshipped Carter Reed's name now treated it exactly like a toxic, cautionary tale, whispered mockingly between bites of overpriced salads at elite business lunches. Massive, glowing digital billboards on Sunset Boulevard that had once proudly flaunted his handsome, arrogant face were rapidly replaced by flashy new ad campaigns, newer, younger CEOs, and fresh, untainted success stories. Reed Technologies was officially in federal liquidation. Its remaining stripped assets being violently divided up and fought over by lawyers exactly like hungry dogs fighting over scraps of bone. Carter sat completely alone at a small, cramped table outside an obscure, overpriced cafe in Beverly Hills. He was wearing dark, oversized sunglasses, desperately trying to hide the deep, hollow, purple circles bruised beneath his exhausted eyes. The young waiter had clearly recognized him from the news, but pointedly said absolutely nothing to him. Fame, Carter was brutally learning, is exactly like hot coffee. It grows bitter and cold the exact second it's no longer being actively served to you. He frantically scrolled through his cracked cell phone. Blinding news headlines flashed across his screen like a form of slow, agonizing digital torture. SEC officially confirms full forensic audit. Carter Reed to face multiple federal criminal charges. Yex model Sloan Vega breaks her silence on abuse. Former Billionaire CEO spotted alone in LA, from ultimate power to pathetic Pariah. Each bold headline physically hit his ego exactly like a heavy, purple bruise. He violently tossed the phone aside onto the metal table and stared blankly at his pathetic reflection in the black surface of his coffee. He had graying hair, spreading rapidly around his temples, and deep, permanent lines carved harshly into his face by immense, crushing stress. He had possessed absolutely everything once upon a time. The sprawling corporate empire, the loyal, beautiful woman, the flawless public illusion of perfection. Now, absolutely all he had left was the deafening, echoing noise of his own catastrophic mistakes. The cafe door opened with a chime, and Sloane stepped out onto the patio. She moved incredibly cautiously, almost as though she were nervously testing the air for poison. She looked significantly smaller and far more fragile than he remembered. She was completely barefaced, devoid of her usual heavy glamour. Makeup wrapped tightly in an oversized, faded denim jacket. Her signature, blonde hair tied back in a messy, careless knot. He froze in his chair. You really shouldn't be here. I literally live in a cheap rental 3 blocks away from here. No, she said incredibly quietly, holding up a hand. Just relax. I am absolutely not here to cause any more drama. He gave a harsh, incredibly bitter laugh. That's literally all we ever were. Together. Sloane ignored the barb and took a seat directly across from him. Her tired eyes meticulously studying his ruined face. You look incredibly tired, Carter. You should try losing absolutely everything you ever used to define your own existence, he spat venomously. She didn't flinch at his anger. Maybe that kind of loss is exactly what you desperately needed to happen. Carter's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ground together. You actually think I deserve all of this happening to me? I think we both absolutely do, she said incredibly softly, looking down at her hands. We maliciously built our entire fake lives directly on top of someone else's immense pain. You arrogantly called it brilliant corporate PR strategy. I foolishly called it true love. It turns out we were both just lying to ourselves. The heavy silence that followed her confession was suffocating. For the very first time since they had met, there was absolutely no fake performance happening between them. There were no bright ring lights, no flashing paparazzi cameras, no immense power or wealth left to trade. There were just 2 broken, empty people staring blankly at the massive, smoldering wreckage they had intentionally created. I saw her viral speech online, Sloane said finally, breaking the quiet. Lauren's speech at the charity gala. Carter's dark gaze shifted away toward the busy street. Yeah. I watched it. Too. She didn't even bother to mention your name once, she noted. He nodded very slowly, the realization crushing him. That is exactly how you. No, she really, truly won the war. A small, hollow laugh escaped Sloane's lips, though it sounded surprisingly sincere. She actually looked incredibly happy up there, She looked so peaceful. She entirely earned it, he said incredibly quietly, staring at his hands. We violently took her peace away from her. She miraculously built it all back from scratch, entirely without us. For a long, poignant moment, the warm California wind rustled gently through the tall palm trees above them, carrying the faint, steady hum of highway traffic and the promise of new beginnings for the rest of the world. Sloane stood up slowly, adjusting her denim jacket. I'm officially leaving LA. Tonight. Maybe I'll go to Paris. Maybe I'll just go nowhere. But I desperately need to finally learn exactly who I am when absolutely nobody is watching me. He stared down at his cold coffee. Do you honestly think I can ever do that? Too. You could, she said, pausing and hesitating for a moment. But first, you will have to completely stop stubbornly believing that you are the victim in this story. She turned on her heel and walked away down the sunny street. Carter didn't even try to stop her or call her back this time. Later that evening, as the golden dusk rapidly fell over the city, he drove completely aimlessly through the winding hills. The flashy luxury cars, the towering glass offices, the massive, glowing billboards, they were all just painful, glaring reminders of exactly what he had foolishly traded real, unconditional love to obtain. He finally parked his cheap rental car near a scenic overlook on Mulholland Drive, staring blankly down at the glittering, massive expanse of the city below. For a very long time, he just sat there in the silence. Then, he whispered softly out into the dark night. I honestly thought having ultimate power would make me completely untouchable. It turns out, it just made me entirely forget how to truly touch anyone else. Absolutely no one answered him. Only the faint, distant hum of the massive city replied, completely unmoved and entirely indifferent to his pain. He slowly reached into his inner jacket pocket, his fingers trembling as he pulled out an old, creased photograph. It was a picture of Lauren, smiling radiantly at a simple, cheap picnic years ago, long before the money and the greed made everything fall apart. He'd secretly kept it on him, though he had absolutely never admitted to himself exactly why. A single, hot tear slid slowly down his weathered cheek. You were the absolute only real thing I ever actually had in my life, he said. To the photo. Somewhere far away, on the exact opposite side of the country, Lauren was probably lovingly putting her beautiful twins to bed. Her bright, genuine laughter echoing softly and happily through the warm halls of the Sterling apartment. And as Carter watched the very last rays of light completely fade from the Los Angeles sky, plunging him into absolute darkness, he finally, truly understood. His failure, his massive corporate empire, didn't violently collapse just because he legally lost everything. It collapsed because he had absolutely never learned what actually mattered enough to fight to keep. Beautiful, vibrant spring had finally returned to New York City in full force. The crisp, clean air carried the faint, intoxicating sweetness of blooming cherry blossoms. Central Park shimmered brilliantly beneath the soft, warm morning sun. Joyful. Children laughed loudly as they played. Determined joggers passed by on the winding trails, and energetic dogs happily chased bright frisbees across the vast green grass. Lauren pushed the heavy twin stroller leisurely along a quiet, winding path, lined beautifully with bright red and yellow tulips, her lightweight silk scarf fluttering playfully in the gentle breeze. Gabriel walked comfortably beside her, casually holding 2 hot coffees and wearing that exact same easy, grounding smile that always seemed to magically anchor her to the earth. "This entire place honestly feels so incredibly different to me now," she said, glancing around at the crowds of people. "The last time I walked through Central Park, I was absolutely terrified of everyone looking at me and judging me. Now, I honestly don't care at all." Gabriel chuckled. "A rich, warm sound. That is simply because now, they are all looking at you for the exact right reasons." She smiled faintly, adjusting her sunglasses. "Maybe, or maybe I just finally, permanently stopped needing the world's approval to exist." They paused their walk near the edge of the large lake, where the brilliant morning light reflected blindingly off the gently rippling water. A talented street musician played a soft, melodic jazz tune on a saxophone nearby. The beautiful, soulful melody floated peacefully through the fresh air, feeling exactly like a quiet, intimate secret that only the two of them could hear. Gabriel gently handed her one of the warm coffee cups. "So tell me," he said, his gray eyes sparkling with curiosity, "what is exactly next for you? You've successfully, completely rebuilt your good name. Your charitable foundation is thriving globally. The twins are perfectly healthy and growing fast. What does the great Lauren Sterling actually want to do now?" She thought about his question for a long moment, her dark gaze peacefully following a pair of wooden rowboats drifting lazily across the sparkling water. "Peace," she said finally, her voice full of absolute certainty. "But absolutely not the kind of boring peace you just hide away in. I want the vibrant kind of peace that you actively live in." He nodded slowly, his eyes full of profound respect. "You have more than earned exactly that." A light, refreshing breeze suddenly rustled through the massive oak trees above them. The twins stirred awake in the stroller, and little Noah let out a soft, happy giggle. Lauren reached down lovingly, brushing her daughter Ava's incredibly soft cheek with a tender hand. "I honestly used to think that my entire life story violently ended the exact day Carter left me," she said softly. "But maybe all of that pain was really just the prologue." Gabriel smiled, stepping closer to her. "Every single truly great story only really starts after the massive fall." They walked on in comfortable silence until they finally reached a small, elevated clearing perfectly overlooking the iconic Manhattan skyline. The massive city looked entirely different from this vantage point. It looked significantly less like a brutal, corporate battlefield, and vastly more like a beautiful, living, breathing thing full of endless possibility. Gabriel stopped walking and turned to face her fully. You know, when I very first met you at the River Cafe that night, he said, his voice dropping slightly, I honestly, arrogantly thought I was just helping you survive. She raised a playful eyebrow. And what do you think now? Now, he said, his eyes incredibly intense and full of emotion. I realized that you were actually the one who stepped in and reminded me exactly what having a true purpose feels like. She laughed softly, her cheeks flushing pink. You're getting incredibly poetic. On me this morning, Mr. Sterling. He stepped even closer, his tone incredibly gentle, but absolutely sure. No. Just being completely honest. For a magical, suspended moment, the entire world around them seemed to literally pause. The chaotic, constant hum of the massive city faded entirely. Beneath the steady, rhythmic sound of their shared breath, Gabriel slowly reached into his tailored coat pocket and pulled out a very small, elegant velvet box. He absolutely didn't drop down to one knee. He didn't loudly make a massive public scene for the passing tourists. He simply, quietly opened the box to reveal a stunning ring. It was incredibly elegant, flawless, and beautifully simple, the exact kind of breathtaking jewelry that respectfully whispered its immense value, rather than arrogantly shouting it. Lauren's eyes widened in sheer shock. Gabriel. He gently took her free hand in his voice incredibly low and vibrating with sincerity. I absolutely do not want to rescue you. I don't want to complete you. And I certainly don't want to try and fix what is already perfectly, beautifully whole. I just desperately want to build a real life with you. Slowly. Honestly. In the exact same way that true peace slowly builds after a massive storm. Her dark eyes instantly filled to the brim, happy tears shimmering brightly in the morning sunlight. You already did build that with me, she whispered, her voice cracking with overwhelming joy. But yes, I absolutely want that too. He gently slid the beautiful, cold ring onto her finger. The fit was absolutely, miraculously perfect. The soulful saxophone melody swelled beautifully behind them. The massive city, breathing again around them, vibrant, beautiful, and completely alive. Gabriel leaned forward and kissed her forehead with profound reverence, then pulled her close and whispered against her skin, to beautiful second chances. She smiled brilliantly through her falling tears, wrapping her arms around his neck, to beautiful new beginnings. The twins laughed happily from the stroller, almost exactly as if they were perfectly echoing their mother's immense joy. They stayed standing there, together for a very long time, peacefully watching the massive city pulse with vibrant life. The towering skyline glowed with bright, golden morning light, and, for the very first time in years, Lauren absolutely didn't feel small or insignificant beneath it. She felt like an integral, powerful part of it. She looked up at Gabriel, her voice incredibly steady and full of fierce, maternal love. We will definitely teach them the value of kindness. Won't we? We'll teach them that massive success means absolutely nothing if you lose your heart along the way. He nodded solemnly, his gray eyes incredibly soft and promising. That is an absolute promise. And as the bright sun rose significantly higher over Central Park, Lauren Hayes, Sterling, a woman once completely broken, but now magnificently whole, realized that her life was absolutely not a tragic comeback story anymore. It was simply a beautiful, enduring love story that had finally, miraculously found its true home. The bright, warm morning sun spilled gently and beautifully through the massive, arched windows of the Sterling townhouse on the Upper East Side. The incredibly comforting smell of sizzling pancakes and freshly brewed, strong coffee filled the entire spacious kitchen. Lauren stood happily at the Viking stove, her dark hair tied up in a messy, effortless bun, casually wearing one of Gabriel's oversized, crisp white, button-down shirts over her favorite, worn-in jeans. She hummed a soft, cheerful tune as the twins played happily on the Persian rug on the floor. Their infectious, innocent laughter echoing loudly and joyfully through the massive house, exactly like sweet music. It had been exactly 1 full year since the grueling final court hearing. It had been an entire year since the global headlines had finally shifted completely from toxic, sensational scandal to inspiring, powerful redemption. And for the very first time in her adult life, her daily routine was beautifully, blissfully ordinary. Gabriel walked briskly into the kitchen, the sleeves of his dress shirt rolled up to his forearms, holding a thick stack of morning newspapers. "You officially made the front page again today," he said with a massive, proud grin, leaning against the marble island. "Don't worry, it's the really good kind of news this time." She turned around from the stove, holding a spatula, offering a mock glare. "Please, God, tell me it is not yet another obnoxious billionaire power couple." Headline: I am literally just trying to be a normal mom who can successfully flip these pancakes without breaking them. He laughed out loud, a rich, happy sound, placing the heavy paper flat on the counter. The bold, black headline read, "Lauren Hayes Sterling launches massive global fund for single mothers, grace over greed." She stared down at the printed words for a long, quiet moment, then smiled, incredibly softly. "Grace over greed," she repeated, tasting the words. "I actually really like that a lot. That is exactly because it is exactly who you are at your core," Gabriel said, walking over and gently kissing her forehead before pouring himself a mug of black coffee. As the twins happily babbled and played on the floor, Lauren felt a sudden, powerful tug of sweet nostalgia. She glanced down at her wedding ring, the simple, elegant Tiffany diamond band Gabriel had so thoughtfully chosen, and thought deeply of absolutely everything it symbolized. It didn't represent staggering wealth, and it certainly didn't represent elite social status. It represented pure, unadulterated peace. The exact kind of profound, lasting peace that simply could not ever be bought with dirty money. Later that same sunny afternoon, they casually drove across the bridge to the River Cafe, the exact, magical place where their partnership had truly started. The iconic skyline shimmered brilliantly across the dark waters of the east river, the bright sunlight bouncing beautifully off the towering glass towers of Manhattan. The exact same secluded corner table where Gabriel had once gravely handed her that life-saving folder of corporate evidence now held two simple glasses of sparkling water, a beautiful, vibrant vase of fresh tulips, and the gentle, joyful chaos of two twin toddlers actively smearing breadcrumbs all across the pristine white tablecloth. Lauren looked thoughtfully out the large window, deeply remembering the terrified, desperate woman she had been that snowy night, heavily pregnant, publicly humiliated, completely broke, and utterly lost. The sharp, agonizing ache that once lived permanently in her chest was completely gone now. Entirely. Replaced by something incredibly tender, warm, and overflowing with life. Gabriel reached gently across the table, affectionately brushing a rogue breadcrumb from her wrist. "What exactly are you thinking about so intensely?" She smiled a very faint, nostalgic smile. "I was just thinking that I almost didn't even show up here that night. I was thinking that if I had cowardly stayed home, too scared and too silent to fight, I might still be miserably living as a pathetic side character in someone else's horrible story." He nodded slowly, his eyes full of respect. "But you absolutely didn't stay home. You walked right in through those doors. You bravely faced absolutely everything they threw at you." She glanced at him, her dark eyes incredibly soft and full of love. "You know what is really funny? I honestly used to think that true love was supposed to be incredibly loud. I thought it was supposed to be massive, grand gestures, dramatic, screaming fights, and all that toxic chaos. But now, I think real, true love just sounds exactly like this." He tilted his head, smiling. "Like what, exactly?" She smiled brilliantly, looking around the table. "Like pancakes sizzling on a stove. Like happy babies laughing. Like a comfortable silence that absolutely doesn't hurt you." He reached out and warmly enveloped her hand in his. "Then let's absolutely promise to keep it exactly that way." Meanwhile, completely across town in a significantly smaller, depressing federal courtroom, Carter Reed stood silently before a stern judge for his final criminal sentencing. He wore a very plain, cheap, off-the-rack suit. There were absolutely no news cameras present, no flashy PR teams, and certainly no applause. The massive, glittering empire he had so ruthlessly built had completely vanished into thin air, And right along with it went the toxic, suffocating arrogance that had once filled every single room he ever entered. The unsmiling judge read the final, binding decision incredibly calmly. 5 years of strict federal probation, massive, millions in financial restitution, and a permanent, lifetime ban from ever holding corporate leadership or sitting on a board of directors again. When he finally stepped outside the courthouse doors, absolutely no one was there waiting for him. There was only the loud, depressing sound of distant city traffic and the incredibly faint, haunting echo of his own terrible life choices. For the very first time in his life, he truly felt the crushing weight of his own name, and tragically realized exactly how incredibly little it actually meant in the real world. Meanwhile, Lauren and Gabriel took the twins for a long, beautiful walk through the winding paths of Brooklyn Bridge Park. The gentle afternoon breeze smelled wonderfully of salt water and fresh spring blooms. The massive city pulsed vibrantly all around them, incredibly alive and surprisingly forgiving. Lauren gently lifted her laughing daughter into her arms, kissing her chubby cheek and whispering incredibly softly into her ear, "You will absolutely never, ever have to fight to earn your basic worth in this world. My sweet girl, you were beautifully born with it." Gabriel smiled warmly beside her, watching them. "You really should put that exact quote up on the foundation's main wall downtown." "Maybe I actually will," she said, laughing. "I'll paint it right next to the line that started it all. Don't ever confuse silence with weakness." As the bright sun finally dipped beautifully behind the towering skyline, painting the river in strokes of liquid gold and deep purple, Lauren looked around at her beautiful, messy, perfect life. It was absolutely no longer a brutal, exhausting battlefield. It was simply a home. And in that incredibly quiet, glowing, perfect moment, the epic story that had once begun with unimaginable, cruel betrayal finally, beautifully ended with absolute, unconditional grace. It was living, breathing proof that sometimes the absolute sweetest revenge you can ever achieve is simply living your life incredibly well, deeply loved, and entirely free. So, that is exactly how our incredible story finally ends. But if you are still here, watching and listening with me until this very moment, then maybe, just maybe, something profound in this story truly touched a hidden part of your own heart today. And that means this story absolutely wasn't just about Lauren, Gabriel, or Carter. It was deeply about all of us. Life has a very strange, often painful way of completely breaking us down to our absolute lowest point before it finally teaches us what truly matters. As the brilliant Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once profoundly wrote, "The obstacle is the way." Sometimes, the exact, agonizing pain we so desperately try to run away from eventually becomes the exact, necessary path that safely leads us back home to ourselves. Lauren's incredible journey reminds us all that losing absolutely everything you thought you wanted isn't the tragic end of your book. It is simply the beautiful, necessary start of rebuilding your life with absolute truth, undeniable grace, and fierce self-respect. No matter what terrible betrayal, profound loss, or suffocating silence you have faced in your own life, please, always remember this: true peace is absolutely never found in seeking toxic revenge. It is only found in rising up again, quietly, powerfully, and entirely on your own terms. So take a massive, deep breath today. Forgive what hurt you so you can drop the heavy weight and actively start again. Be stronger. Be calmer. Be wiser. And if this emotional story reached you today, if it genuinely helped you, believe that true, lasting healing is still possible for you, then please give this video a massive like. Share it right now with someone in your life who desperately needs a little hope tonight. And please don't forget to subscribe to our growing channel, because right here, we don't just tell stories, we share the lessons that help us all heal together. You are entirely capable of rewriting your own ending. See you in the next video.